ready, I'm going to go ahead and fade away. And Dustin, you start.
Cool. All right. So the main thing that we can test when we talk about evolution is speciation.
Hmm.
And basically, I don't see any evidence of speciation. Um, Ultimately, when it comes down to evolution, it is an unscientific proposition. By scientific, that means we have to have a hypothesis that is testable and a null hypothesis that would show a condition that would disqualify or negate the hypothesis. None of these things have been demonstrated in evolution. There's always some kind of evidence that's proposed, and then we say, given enough time, it could lead to such and such. Um, my counter argument to this is that biology works in operations of systems. You have to have multiple things converging together at once that work in a synergy. And if one of those aspects gets tweaked a little bit, then the other things uh, don't work in conjunction with them. The system falls apart. You need to have a working system of multiple things together. And we'll talk about that as we get into it. But a few points that I have here to demonstrate this would be abiogenesis. I know people complain about abiogenesis not being evolution itself, but I mean, we're going to end up talking about it because it's pretty natural to think, well, the origin of species. Okay, well, where did species come from? Well, that's the origin of life. Okay. From that, we have DNA and information. The next step, even after abiogenesis, would be the evolution from asexual to sexual reproduction. From there, we have issues with the Cambrian explosion, uh, revealing uh, basically fully formed species in what would appear to be like blades of grass rather than a tree of life, as they say it. So, if we talk about universal common descent having this sort of tree structure coming down to an original, what we actually see in the evidence would be more like blades of grass starting at different points and then coming up from there and barely branching off. From there, if we're talking, there's other um, basically leaps in the fossil record. Uh, and then eventually coming up to humans, we have issues with human uniqueness and uh, how many things that humans have that are drastically unique compared to other species. All of these issues along the way, there will be presented mathematical issues both with the amount of mutations required alongside the amount of time that is proposed. Uh, Also, regarding how the mutations occur and whether or not they are quote unquote beneficial. I know we'll get into what's a beneficial mutation versus something neutral. Um, there's also philosophical issues that are always loaded into evolution. We have things proposed like order, or um, really, order is kind of the biggest one, or complexity. Complexity is also a philosophically loaded term. Essentially, evolution is speculation. They'll take a little molehill, they'll make a mountain out of it, and run with it. And if you dare challenge it, then it's seen as being ridiculous. But that's what I'm here to do today. Go ahead, Socrates. Thanks,
Yeah.
man.
No, thank you so much for the introduction. Um, yeah. So, I mean, what is evolution and what is not evolution? It feels like when I hear from a kind of, I guess, creationist perspective or religious perspective, and I hear kind of challenges to evolution, it feels like it's really specific things of it, like, oh, you're saying that humans are animals. You're saying that my grandfather was a monkey, or we're descended from monkeys, things like that. Evolution is probably best defined as changes in allele frequencies between populations in successive generations. So the idea that it's like, oh, evolution says one species can come from another, that's kind of downstream of evolution. Evolution is a really well demonstrated fact, and it's a field of study. There are specific biological other facts that we might discover, like, oh, humans have common ancestors with other animals, things like that. Or, oh, all of life has a common ancestor, or, oh, we think that the first self-replicating molecule was this type of molecule versus another. Those are different specific things within biology or maybe geology that we can look at and try to understand. But really, evolution is what happens in groups of organisms between generations and how those allele frequencies change. It's just very, very, very brief, just primer on genetics and what that means. So all life has DNA, and within DNA there are specific regions called genes that code for proteins, and those proteins have functions within the cells. RNA itself has functions within the cells, but we won't go into too much detail probably. And most of those are conserved. They don't change very much. But if mutations do occur in the DNA, that's the kind of information that's passed between one generation to another, then that causes potentially changes in the proteins or the regulations of proteins. So the degree to which different proteins are produced, or the times at which they're produced, and that changes functions within the cells. So the way that an organism in one generation develops versus in another, or the way that it kind of behaves, those can change. And what we observe is that they behave in a way that is very kind of logically straightforward when we just look at the world. So we see different mutations occur, and the different organisms that mutate in some kind of diverse fashion, they'll either survive and procreate well or poorly based on the conditions they're in. So there's classic things like you have moths that are light colored, and then, right, I'm sure you've heard of this example, and then Industrial Revolution, and the trees get covered in soot, and so the trees are darker. And so within the population of moths that contains both, more lighter colored individuals and more darker colored individuals, the ones that are lighter colored are more visible to birds or whatever, and they eat them. The ones that blend in with the trees better are eaten less, and so they reproduce more. And so from a couple of generations later, you have a larger percentage of the population is darker in color. That's the phenotype. That's the thing that's expressed by the organism, and that's related to some changes in DNA, which is the kind of information that's passed from one generation to another. So that's really what the core of evolution is about. These kind of facts around, is there one common ancestor versus multiple common ancestors? Where do those ancestors come from? Where do they first come from? Are humans related to other organisms? Those are specific biological facts that you could interrogate, but they aren't the core of evolution. All those things could be not the case, and evolution would still be a functional theory that we'd use all the time. I think it's maybe a good place to stop that opening.
Cool. Yeah, let's actually just go ahead and start right there with that last little statement, just for a kind of friendly chat on this.
Yeah.
The multiple common ancestor thing, rather than a universe or single common ancestor. What do you know about kind of the way that evolution is going with saying, well, there could be multiple initial ancestors, and then there's kind of more like hybridization rather than large mutations with complete divergence. Rather, it actually is more like there's two separate, and then they hybridize into a population. Are you familiar with any of that kind of work? It's kind of more modern work.
Are you talking about in like archaebacteria versus eubacteria and like horizontal gene transfer?
I'm actually not familiar with it in bacteria. I'm actually a little bit more familiar with it with human origins.
So human as like a separate.
Yeah, it's
that sounds.
I've seen a little. I know it's super speculative. Yeah, no, it is, but it's work that's come out pretty recently. I'm not exactly sure the year, and I actually didn't even research this for this debate. I just thought it'd be fun to talk about since you mentioned it. So, yeah, it actually does seem like through tracing our human genome, there actually appears to be at least 3 different original human, what's the word? Precursors?
Are you talking about like Homo habilis versus shoot, what was the ones that we breeded with and ate? We came up through through Europe. Um,
The Neanderthals and
Neanderthals, yeah. Hmm.
yeah, not just those though. The Neanderthal is only like 2% of our human DNA, but we have like three completely distinct. I don't know if they call them like Homo erectus or Homo habilis or something before that, but they actually are what appear to be like fully formed humans. But when we test their genetic code, they're in at least three groups, possibly a fourth one. It's all done through modern genome sequencing, and it's really confusing to them because they thought that there was at least one main population of humans, and then we spread out from there, and then there were divergences that way. But actually the evidence is kind of pointing the other way, that there is at least three distinctly evolved groups, and then there's hybridization and convergence from there. But
Yeah,
okay,
I
go
mean,
ahead.
just
Sorry.
I mean, it's certainly conceivable and certainly interesting if there's multiple um, multiple human so we kind of like branched at some point and then I don't know, it's I'm trying to think of like a less crude way to say that, like an Alabama family tree situation where there's a common ancestor and then there's some kind of reconvergences at different points. That's that certainly doesn't sound impossible, and we know um, that we interbred with Neanderthals. I think for people who are like high European ancestry, it's like a little bit higher percent, but yeah.
Right. All right, so let's get into it. And I bring that up knowing that it's arguably not a proof or a disproof for evolution. It's just interesting. Um, so let's go ahead and take what I really want to get into is forming a null hypothesis,
Mm-hmm.
because essentially, if you say that evolution is change, then what would be a null for that?
Yeah.
Stagnancy?
No. So the null would be something more um, like random. So you would see like random changes over time. So rather than seeing something that you could model based on the environmental conditions of a population, you would just see that there's kind of like random genetic drift, something like that, maybe. I mean, that would be like
Yep.
on a specific. So for a theory, you don't necessarily need to have like a null hypothesis, right? So like the law of universal gravitation, I guess the null would be things don't gravitate or something, but it's really more about how that works than like whether it's true. You have individual experiments that you might do, but a theory is not a hypothesis.
I understand that, but a theory is built on confirmed
Yep,
hypotheses.
absolutely. Hmm.
So, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. So like within gravitation, if we're talking about the hypothesis, at least on Earth, because of the mass, it's 9.8 acceleration of 9.8 meters per second, and
Yep.
and then we can test that, and if there's a different outcome, then it's nulled.
Hmm.
We can't really do that with evolution, because if we're just saying change, then it's like, oh look, it changed, and then you say, well, if it's random, well, that's kind of actually begging the question how in like I said before, there's all these philosophical things that want to be granted. What is random? Ultimately, in in science, there really is no such thing as random. And in fact, randomness, if we look at random number generators, it's actually really, really hard to make. We have to really work hard to make randomness. And even then, random itself requires order. You can't understand what random is without order. Otherwise, things just are. Like if you see a pile of toothpicks on the floor and they're all mixed up in whatever, you go, oh, well, that's random. Well, why? Why is that random? Well, because you understand that there's a sense of order to where they can either be lined up vertically or horizontally or stacked together all neatly. There's an order to it, there's a pattern to it. And a pattern requires intelligence and agency. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to I'm not actually going to, well, I'm going to do my best to not divert it to like intelligent design and stuff. I really do want to just talk about evolution, stick as scientific, and make my critiques that way. So don't feel like I'm trying to go that way. I am talking about specifically, if we see a change, how can we determine if it's random or ordered? Because especially if we're talking about mutations over time in genetics, and then we see, say, just because my hand's here, say all of a sudden we see a new chromosome pop in, how do we know that that's random or it's something that is predictable? We can't really predict a new thing or whatever.
Yeah. So when we're talking about and by the way, just for this debate, how should we deal with, like, if I want to jump in, I don't want to like cut you off, but
Go ahead. If
what's
you
like a
feel there's
good
something, yeah, if you feel like there's something super
You,
important, hop in.
okay.
you definitely feel
I'm
free to,
relaxed.
yeah, feel
Yeah.
free to interject. If it comes too much on either side, I'll come in and say,
Okay,
okay, I
cool.
think this
I'll
is
let you
what you need to.
moderate if
Yeah, yeah,
if
yeah,
need be.
yeah.
Okay.
But feel free to
Sounds good.
interject, and if the other person, if I feel like somebody's getting steamrolled or get scalloped or whatever, I'll jump in. But otherwise, feel free to interject.
All right, sounds good. So when we talk about randomness, so it's it's relatively straightforward to model. I mean, there's a lot of complexity. This is some of the work that I end up doing in my daily life of modeling genetic changes. But to say that there's random changes versus discernible patterns is something that that computer software and modeling is quite good at. So to say there's random genetic drift versus discernible patterns, that's the kind of thing that we do all the time. And there are times that we can say, okay, there's certain so for example, there's certain parts of the genome that are especially conserved, right? So we see that they mutate less often, and there's other parts that are less conserved, and there's looking at say one population to another. So looking at one human population to another, we can see things that are drifts in haplotypes that are like segments of parts of the genome that kind of shift together, and there's parts that change. So there's parts that kind of like drift, and there's parts that are kind of moving more together. I feel like I'm not explaining this very clearly.
So
But to
just
say
to
and just to
go
address
ahead.
when it comes to like random number generators on the scale of like numbers of organisms, this is something we can do really well. It's technically it's not an issue at all.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to say, just for bringing it back on topic, and the question is essentially what we're getting at is evolution is speciation, and how much of how much of that can occur. I mean, I think it's completely assumed. It's um it's the fallacy of assuming the consequent of, like, well, if we have a big chasm and we start at point A and then we take one step or even see two steps towards point B, then given enough time, they'll eventually reach point B. But that's really not what we observe. We actually see with a lot of biology, like, okay, so, I mean, we could get into DNA a bit more. We have self-correcting mechanisms, and this is
Mm-hmm.
all the way from the very beginning, which, I mean, abiogenesis, it's just crazy how you have, at the very least, you need DNA, RNA, you need the amino acids, carbohydrates, you need a cell membrane. If not a cell membrane, then you have to put the burden on the environment to not destroy
Well,
all of the things
wait.
above, and those
So
all need to come together at the same time. I mean, and
so maybe
then
we should choose like a route for
to
now of
narrow it.
of speciation versus abiogenesis. Those are going to be relatively divergent
Right,
topics.
right. So let's go ahead and narrow it down, I guess. I guess for now we'll just grant that all of these things are in existence and deal with speciation.
Let's do speciation, because I mean,
Let's do speciation. Okay.
it's fair to talk about abiogenesis. It's definitely related, but it's a different field of study fundamentally from evolution.
I
Um,
understand.
so speciation. So let's start with just at like a theoretical level. Do you think so we can talk about like empirically what we see, whatever, but do you think that speciation is something that could conceivably occur with how you understand biology and evolution to work?
Conceivably,
Like, could you lay
I
out a
think
scenario by which speciation could occur in in a hypothetical
if
population?
in a hypothetical, yeah, but I'd have to suspend a lot of evidence.
How
Um,
what would that look like? What would that look like for
right.
speciation
So
then to occur?
so what we have when we start multiplying in populations and we start getting mutations and adaptations, we have um, essentially a rate limit. There's always a limit. It can't be carried out exponentially. So I mean, if we talk about a simple example of one population changing from being able to jump 1 foot to being able to jump 2 feet over the course of, say, 20 years. And then we can't extrapolate that out infinitely to say, well, in the next 200 years, they're going to be able to jump to the moon or
Sure,
whatever. There's
that's
always a
fair.
biological rate limit. And the reason that we have this at the genome level is because of all of these mechanisms that come into play in DNA. There's all these self-correcting, self-stabilizing mechanisms that only allow DNA to mutate so much. The mutations that we do observe at this point are not even a rise of new genetic information. What we
Okay,
basically
so
have in
that's a good
all of the.
point
So let's go ahead
to
and get
jump
into
in on. So what
evidences.
do you mean
Yeah.
that first of all, let me ask this first as like a theoretical thing. Is it possible for random mutations to generate new genetic information? Like is could like hypothetically could that
If
occur?
you,
And then we could talk about whether it like does or not, right? But hypothetically could that occur?
I don't see a mechanism for it.
So if I have a
So it
gene,
would be against. I
mhm.
mean, through random selection, and it doesn't appear to have ever occurred. Everything that we see would be um what are is it four categories? You have transposition, insertion, deletion, and can't remember what are the those are things that occur with
Yeah,
DNA
so
at
you
the.
can like you can mutate a base pair, you can duplicate it, you can delete it,
Mhm,
but there's also structural variation. There's copy number changes. Those are
mhm.
more a little bit more complicated, but they occur a lot in cancer, which is why I'm more familiar with those.
Right.
Um,
So, Mr. Westford, if you would do me a favor here of
mm.
bringing up that tan image that I sent you, that looks, it's one of the first ones I sent you, that has, it says E. coli, something with the E. coli network. It's my E. coli regulatory network. The next one over. Yeah, there you go. So let's look at this for a minute. This is essentially what we're looking at when it comes to, this is just kind of a simple model of comparing DNA on the left versus what would look like a Linux operating system on the right. The top portion that we're looking at on the left would be the small DNA that would function as the operating system that has a ton of different outputs, essentially going down to the middle level, which would be like RNA and proteins and things like that, out to the bottom, which is very wide. You have this very pyramidal structure, which is very, very bottom heavy.
Wait,
You have a ton of outputs from DNA
okay,
from a very small amount of DNA, right? So like um humans have
wait.
the 20th
These are regulatory networks, so these are like genes, right? Not DNA, or
in the
not
in the
like
middle
in the
in the
middle.
middle section on the left, that middle period. Yeah, that would be the outputs from the DNA. So we're starting at the top, which would be the DNA, sending the information downward to the next step. Those would
Okay,
be all the regulatory RNA, protein building, and then outward to the complete outputs. At the very bottom level, you have a ton of different outputs
and by outputs you're
based
talking about
on,
like metabolites or
no, actually, like fully formed tissues, organized tissues,
tissues of
functions for,
E. coli?
uh, yeah, like the completed structures, completed and organized structure
Wait,
is what they're
um,
talking about here.
I might be mixed up. E. coli doesn't have tissues. It has, maybe organelles, but it's
Hmm.
a single-celled organism, right?
Well, it would still be structured, right? It's not just going to be a pile of organelles. This is looking at the information that's being sent and where it's going to and from each step of the way. And the point of it is basically that the information that we get out of DNA is super dense. Um, I mean, it can be read in multiple ways, right? It reads like 3 letters at a time. You can have a sideways, you can read it backwards, and all those sorts of things, activated, non-activated, so on and so forth. Compared to a computer system on the right, we have uh, the operating system sending out inputs to the software or whatever at the next level down, and then you have a very, very, very tiny amount of end result of information from that. So like to run a calculator on a computer, you have a lot of programming that goes through an intermediary, and then you have the output of just a couple of numbers. There's a lot that goes into the base system here. So my point in bringing this up is yeah, I was trying to explain that, and now I forgot where we came from.
Well, it's hugely complex. I mean, I'll grant you, I've worked on microbial modeling, and yeah, I've made way gnarlier looking graphs. I tried to do like a 3D plot of the gene interactions, and it was just a mess.
It's a mess.
Yeah,
It's a
it's very
mess. It's so
complicated.
far beyond us still.
But
Oh, that's what I was going to
yeah,
say.
what
That's
was
right.
the?
So here's my point. Here's my point in this, and then I'll turn it over to you. Essentially, if we look at like the computer system that's over there on the right, or we're looking at it, even at the very base operation level, every computer programmer knows if you change even 1 or 2 letters in the programming, you're going to mess up a whole lot of things way downstream, big time. It's going to fall apart. And when it comes to things like random mutations that lead to something beneficial, we've never seen that. It would actually be really, I mean, it would take a intervention through humans really to be able to do something like that, which is like something we do with CRISPR. But when it comes, I mean, a tiny change in with so many outputs on something like E. coli that's even very simple, the organism it's either a neutral change, or it's something that causes something to break, or it's something that causes it to die. That's really all that we've ever observed. And I mean, I know you brought up the peppered moth. I know there's other things that we can get into that talk about that. But yeah, that's essentially the foundation of what we're talking about here.
Okay, I think that's a wonderful place to start. So let's start with the kind of small scale, and then we can get to the bigger scale. So starting with like kind of individual mutations, and then getting to like kind of phenotypic changes. That's really what we're talking about. An organism that behaves like meaningfully differently from something that evolved from, right? That would be
Yeah, if I
like
can
a
interject,
prerequisite. Yeah, please.
as well as being able to reproduce.
Sure. If
Fertile
it's
offspring. That's a
if it
big
acts differently,
prerequisite.
but it's
Yeah.
like it's like a dead end. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just going back to that question um, on gaining information or new information being introduced into DNA. Can you imagine, like at a theoretical level, how that might occur, or what that might look like? So you have a genome, you have a bunch of DNA. How could new information be added?
I mean, if we're talking about like, we'd have to say like some kind of even an insertion into a chromosome wouldn't always exactly make sense, because it actually you can have smaller and shorter DNA segments that actually have a larger output of what would be information. And that's we're almost bordering information theory,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not something that's easily
Sure.
granted.
Okay.
Like, what is
So yeah. So
information?
so we it might be fair to get pedantic if we're talking about like information from an information theory perspective. What's like, but at a colloquial level, right? DNA. If you look at it as information, certainly there's genes that are coding for RNA that turn into protein that are performing functions. That kind of feels information-y at least. rather than the things that we initially thought were junk DNA, but now we're realizing there's a lot more mechanism to it. Um,
Indeed.
but so if you have, so if I have a gene, or 5 letters of a gene, say it's AATTG, whatever,
Sure.
AATTG. If I have just a single point mutation, AATTG turns it into TATTG.
Mhm.
Is that different? Is that different
Uh,
information?
not always. We have. I mean, it's interesting
Sure.
because it,
It might code for the
but
same protein,
but for that,
but it
yes.
might
For
not,
the
right?
sake of that, yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's what's really interesting and difficult about it. SNPs, right?
Oops,
Single
yeah.
single point
Single
mutations.
nucleotide polymorphism.
SNPs. That's not always the whole story because there's a lot that goes on with it. I mean, you can even take those SNPs, something that would be in one place, TTG and then TCG, and then
Mm-hmm.
create an RNA, and then the RNA itself mutates from that to change. It's like, where does all this stuff come
Mm-hmm.
from, dude? It's like, even if you do have that change in the DNA, sure, the information right there is changed, but then you're still producing the same organism,
Hmm.
or
Yep, that's
I mean,
yeah. We'll
ultimately
get
the
to that. We'll
same.
get to that. But just on this like basic single first question, um, it seems like new information can be introduced by random mutation, right? Is that fair?
Yeah, sure, exactly. That's not the thing I'm
Whether it can get
contesting.
to accumulate to some level that something else, but like just you
I
know,
wouldn't call that new though, because
okay.
what I'm talking about when I say new, or when scientists talk about new, they want this new thing to arise as in a step towards something completely different.
Hmm.
Now that's the thing
Wait,
that I'd
so
be
yeah, so
contesting.
I need to interject there because the
Completely different.
the
But go
language
ahead.
that you're using, a step toward something completely different, that's presupposing something that is fundamentally contrary to an evolutionary worldview of biology. No?
No, it's not. I understand your contention. You're thinking I'm saying like A to B toward, but rather I'm saying here's our point of a center, right? We have a center where the stability is, and if you're away, any kind of change would be away from your stagnant center, your stable center.
Yeah,
So
I'm not
if
clear
there's
what that
anything that
is.
we're saying
What's
different,
I
well,
don't know what stable
let's.
center you're talking
So
about.
I mean, um, uh, populations of organisms have a stability about them to the point that they look very familiar. Morphologically, their genome is very similar. So, come on, computer, you're making me look ugly. Don't do that. So if you get a mutation that is unique to that population of species, it would be outside the scope of what that population is. For example, if we're taking humans and a certain organism mutates a slightly larger brain. And that's something I really like.
Hmm.
I don't know how much you know about human brain evolution, but I mean, I like
I
to
think we
talk about
started
that if we
eating more
can get
fruit
into
or
it.
something, and then our brains got bigger.
No,
More
no.
meat,
I mean, we'll get in.
cooking
We
meat,
can get
or
into that.
uh,
There's a few different theories. My favorite one is actually marine life, providing the nutrients necessary to fuel a large brain. And um, I have a screenshot for that I think it would be really cool to talk about. But anyways,
well,
I hope we have time. We're already 30 minutes in.
so we maybe approach this in kind of like a methodical manner. Um, there's I think we need to be a little bit careful of conflating changes in the genome with changes in a, a population away from some kind of stable norm. I mean, populations do shift, but just if we're talking about just starting at changes in the genome, so just these statements around it's impossible for new information to be added. I really do want to hammer out exactly what would be the barrier, right? So you can have DNA that changes a single base pair can change. a bunch of bases can copy from one place to another. You can have inversions where half of a chromosome kind of flips. So you have things in, again, I'm going to reference cancer. You have events in cancer that occur where two genes come together and you have a fusion gene. So look at the Philadelphia gene. You see what I'm talking about? I didn't add that into my deck, but
Sure, and
right.
this is actually
So
where it
we
gets.
do see this. We do see that it's possible for new genes to be created, even, but certainly we see information change. Whether it's new, I would need a much much more I don't know, strict or quantitative definition of what it means to be new. I'm
See,
still
now
not
here's the thing, and maybe you can answer this for me. How does speciation look in an asexual organism?
In an asexual organism, so it occurs a lot slower. You have
Really?
yeah,
I
that's
didn't
my
expect that
understanding.
answer.
Generally, that or there's less diversity introduced, but you still have homologous recombination that can occur. You still have mutations that occur from one generation to another.
Okay, that doesn't
So
really.
in a
Yeah, where do
sexual,
we?
that's generally like I'm thinking of bacteria anyway. I don't know if there's like fungi that do that, but certainly in bacteria they have plasmids that they can kind of pass from one to another. So you have horizontal gene transfer. So that's a way of spreading more information. But what's the specific
Yeah, well, I
question
mean,
on
the
that?
contention is that speciation is usually defined as a population mutating to the point that it can no longer,
Mm-hmm.
or a divergence of
Yeah,
populations mutating to the point that
that they
they
either
can no
can't or
longer
they
breed.
don't.
Yeah, can't or, I mean, even don't would be.
So like the example is with like birds where their
I
calls can
yeah,
be different enough that they actually don't end up reproducing, even though maybe biologically, like they
they
could
could,
genetically, they could.
and that's. I
Um,
mean, that's. I don't really see an issue with that. I don't see how that really proves evolution. Um,
it's not a proof of evolution. It's just an observed
yeah,
fact of the
yeah. I
world.
mean,
Yeah.
that's fine. I mean, humans choose who they want to breed with or not based on behavioral
Sure.
adaptations.
I mean,
So,
in
I mean,
general,
we're still the same species
humans.
when we're talking biology here. So, I mean, the behavioral issues are pretty nebulous.
Humans have been at different times geologically distinct from each other, and we've acquired mutations that I think are meaningful to talk about. But
Yeah, but our
there's only one
genomes
human
still
species.
match.
Yeah.
Our genomes still match. We can still interbreed
Yep.
and have
Absolutely.
fertile offspring. So, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that's the gap that I'm talking about. It's
But
there's too
what is
much
that?
there.
I guess the question is, what does that have to do with? So for humans as a species, we haven't speciated, certainly not recently, anyway, right? Um, I don't know what that has to do with like whether speciation is possible, right?
Because there's no evidence of it. It's a gap. There's a million miles of a gap, and
For
the
humans
evidence that
or
we
in
have is
general.
anything. I mean, let's bring up any example of speciation. I don't see it. Like
Mm-hmm.
you talked about the peppered moth before, right? You have a white population of moths, and then through the Industrial Revolution, now you have a black population. Well, that happens all the time in humans. I mean, a white couple has a black baby all the time, right? That's what my ex-wife told me. Haha, haha. No, no joke. Okay. No, but so what they talk about in the moth there is that it's a transposed genome. It's something that's already present. It's actually just movable. It
Yeah.
works within the system. So it's not
So
it's
that's
not
evolution, not
something that.
speciation. So that's like you have
But that's the thing.
population allele rates, and it's just the rates have shifted. It's not even necessarily a new
But
mutation.
that's no, that's smuggling it in.
What's
That's smuggling
smuggling?
it in. Evolution is the origin of species.
No,
So
it's
you
not.
can't just take it. Yeah, that's what I mean. If okay, neo-Darwinism, where it's changed, we changed the thing so that it's so broad that it's like, oh, look, there's a tiny little change here from white to black. Now it's evolution. No, it's not. It's an adaptation within a species. The thing that's being contested here is speciation. That's still the same
Okay, if
species.
if
Those
we want to
moths
make that
interbreed.
the main thing that's in contention, I'm happy to change the debate to that. I just I
That
figured there
is
was a
what
chance that
evolution
that would
is.
happen, but I just
That's what evolution is. I mean, it's been a modern change in neo-Darwinism to where they say changes in allele frequency is now so, oh look, we have any little change, but that's not a reasonable null hypothesis. That's a fairy tale.
it's what's a
It's a
fairy tale?
fairy tale it's a fairy tale story. It's a narrative. It's something that it's just like, oh
No,
look,
I'm just asking
there's a
what
change.
you're saying this, but what's the this? That's a fairy tale story.
Calling evolution changes in allele frequency. So anytime we see a change in an allele, then oh look, it's evolution. It's evidence for evolution. That's assuming the consequent. It's not it's not what we evidentially see. You're taking one or two little steps, and the gap from one species to the other has so many changes, so many unique attributes to each species that tiny mutations along the way are not going to build up. Somewhere along the way, if you're trying to say tiny mutations adding up, then you're going to have a either completely malformed or even dead organism. That's everything that we see. And the adaptations that we see are tiny ones,
So yeah, so let's. I,
like
I
like
think it's more I think
coloration.
it's more useful to tackle these like very kind of specific like bite-sized kind of claims, right? So around like it's whether it's possible to introduce information, whether it's possible for a population of organism to gain new beneficial traits. I think those are two good things to start at. So I'm not 100% sure where we've landed in terms of new information, but at least for the moment, moving on to new beneficial traits. So one example that I would bring up are the bacterial populations that are capable of digesting plastic. So plastic is a pretty recent man-made material that hasn't existed in nature, and it sat in landfills, just kind of taking up space, or maybe you can build on it, whatever. But there's populations of bacteria now that are capable of eating plastic, and obviously that's good for them because it's a food source. It happens to be good for us because now we have maybe some way to break down some plastic, and maybe now that China isn't dealing with our recycling issues anymore, they're kind of done with that. Maybe we need more of that. But that's a new trait. It's clearly positive if you can eat something new that you weren't able to. For humans, I have European ancestry. I can tolerate a huge amount of lactose, and that could be useful for me. I don't get stomach issues when I eat ice cream. So I mean, is
So
that
the
one
term,
example of a
if I
new
can
trait?
interject here,
Yeah, please.
uh, the term positive, that's completely relative to the situation. What's perhaps positive for because we have
Absolutely.
a plastic overload. Well, if we get enough of that bacteria, then it's going to start destroying all of our computer equipment and make it fall apart or whatever, or wherever it gets.
Well,
I'm
wait,
just saying
wait.
context
Just
dependent.
yes. So jumping in. So I agree that it's context dependent, but the context absolutely has to be for that organism. It can't be for humans. It can't be that can't be the
Sure.
relevant thing,
I
right?
just I
Is
just
that
wanted
is
to
that
point
fair?
out that was a philosophically loaded thing to say positive. I mean, it has to be context dependent, so it's just
Well,
wanted to
so
add
so
that
it would
on.
be right. So as I see it, there's only one definition of that would be at all workable, which would be some. Maybe there are. Maybe I'm talking about out of my ass, but the only one that I can think of really is it's like if this organism has this trait, it will better be able to survive and or reproduce in this exact like moment in time. What happens a year from now, or in the time scale of a bacteria, what happens in maybe a couple weeks from now, who knows? But at the given moment in time, it's something that better helps it survive and or reproduce. And being
Sure.
able to take use of a new food source seems to me definitely like a positive thing.
Seems
for
to
that
be.
bacteria, right?
Sure, in a temporary thing and whatever. Just saying it's philosophically loaded, and
Wait, what's
if we
philosophically
wanted
loaded?
to say better,
Uh,
to say
I
better,
thought that was your term.
better of
Maybe I
anything.
misheard. What was the term
Um,
that you applied in terms of you were saying that something like that couldn't happen?
I was talking about a unique aspect of the genome arising and leading to speciation. But so that, and then you brought up the bacteria that eats plastic, and I'm not sure about this particular example.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Do you know what the mutation is? Because generally what I've seen in other bacteria that begin to eat new food, it's it's a genome that is already existent and then it just gets turned on.
Mm-hmm.
Since and plastics are hydrocarbons, that's
Mm-hmm.
totally not unreasonable for a bacteria to already be familiar with hydrocarbons.
I'm not aware of the specific mutation. It's an enzyme variant. Um,
Just for the sake of time,
mhm.
I mean, even food itself, again,
But I mean,
this is where it gets.
let's say that it's some I don't know, you could call it some like latent capability or something that it already had the building blocks for it, right?
Right.
It's not like a new module down from God put into place like you're getting a mech upgrade or something. Now you can
Right.
shoot rockets. It's something that it already had like a lot of those pieces together, and it just kind of tweaked it in some way.
Yeah,
Um,
like a genome activation
sure,
versus
but
being stagnant or dormant.
if that's the result, so if plastic didn't exist and it was never using this capability,
Sorry.
oh, okay, I didn't know if it was interjecting, um, but if speaking about God coming down, if plastic didn't exist out in the world, this bacteria weren't using it, and now plastic does exist, or presumably, some bacteria were being born that did have that capability, but there wasn't any plastic, so they didn't have any competitive advantage. So they just it didn't take off as like an adaptation within a population or a little change within a population. But now that there is plastic, it can kind of take off, and it's the hot new thing within this bacterial population. Even if those pieces were there before, that's a mutation that caused this to be active, and the fact that the environment is such that this is now useful for them. Now this is an allele that has increased in frequency within the population. So again, this isn't going to speciation. This isn't really even like kind of almost on that topic at all. But just within these kind of particular building blocks of what's possible to alter within some organism. Is that a fair example of
Sure.
like?
I mean, it's fair in the sense that if if you have a potential causal explanation, in this case, the theory of evolution, sure, it doesn't really go against it. I don't see how it really adds to it. Um, but I mean, scientifically, what we're talking about would be potential causation. And ultimately, we're not looking for the things that would potentially prove it. We're looking for disproofs,
Sure,
right?
yeah, I mean that's fair.
And and the thing is that we see is there's no evidence for the thing that's being contested here, speciation. There's
Mm-hmm.
and there's evidence against it,
Mm-hmm.
which regarding the mechanisms that caused the genome to revert to its original population.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I want to build up to speciation by first talking about just the theoretical constraints on how that could occur. So it seems like it's possible to introduce information through mutations, through changes in the DNA, and it's possible for those to lead to some meaningful difference in how an organism behaves. Are there anything else that you want to highlight as what might be like a from a theoretical level? How much
Possible is such a stretch in science. It's
possible
like
or plausible or I
Plausible
don't know. I mean,
is a bigger stretch.
sure.
I mean, in science, do we want to deal with possibilities, or do we want to point towards probabilities based off of evidence and
No, I think we
hypotheses that
absolutely
can be
have to
nullified?
deal with theory, right? Because if you say at a theoretical level, it's impossible that okay, I have a population A, and it splits into population B and C, and they live geographically distinct for I don't know, millions of years, billions of years, 20 years, whatever it is, and they mutate to the degree that they're no longer genetically compatible. They wouldn't be able to interbreed. That would be like what speciation would look like, right? Is there
Yeah, that's what it
anything
would look like.
is
Yeah.
is there anything at a theoretical level that says that kind of occurrence couldn't occur? And if not, then we can talk about whether it has occurred, evidence for, against, whatever. But just at a theoretical level, is there something that deems that impossible?
Well, the genome is impossible.
Or I
It's
don't
kind
know.
of a hard word. I know.
Yeah,
I'm trying to be
yeah.
generous here too and
Yeah.
charitable. Sure. Yeah, possible. I mean, through the mechanism of it, the thing is it's we're not just talking about just that occurring, right? We're talking about occurring through natural selection,
Mm-hmm.
through environmental
Yeah,
pressures,
exactly.
as well as within there's also the constraints of time
Mm-hmm.
as
Mm-hmm.
well, right?
Yep.
And the time also does reflect back on the environment because say you have one population uh, moving to a different geographic region and that gives them one mutation, and then the same population moves a different way with the original. Now you have three populations, one having a certain mutation, the other one being the original population, the other one having a completely different mutation. Then if we want things to add up in the mutations, the populations would have to come together that have mutated, and they would also have to exclude the original population that didn't mutate, because when you have a mutation coming back to the original population, it's what we observe is definitely the mutations get weeded out and it
With
comes back to the norm of the original quote unquote stable population, which is what I mean, you're
with.
familiar with punctuated equilibrium, right? This is kind of what I'm referring to
Mm-hmm.
is punctuated equilibrium.
I mean, this is something that we look at in the fossil record, when we look at studying populations from one time to another. In the advent of DNA sequencing, we see that there's genetic drift. I mean, populations don't, you know, whether or not they move from one location to another, their environment drastically changes. There is drift that occurs, right? So there's no like stable, just something. They always have to stay within some range. That's not. I mean, there's
Are you talking
right.
about so let me get this clear. Are you proposing that the evidence that we have in genetic drift is enough that it would be a speciation, or is it just mutations within a species because of environmental changes over time?
I'm saying even. I mean, so there. You could imagine that maybe there's some environment so stable and a population so so stable in its behavior that maybe you could get to a point where there's really minimal genetic drift. But in general, in the world, there's enough, just changes in environment, changes in certainly like animal behavior, certainly human behavior. Our culture evolves, so that's kind of spurring things on. But there's there's genetic drift that simply occurs just of again allele changes just going up and down within populations as people interbreed, intermix, random mutations are introduced. I'm not sure where this concept of like a stable center that's like enduring forever or whatever. I'm not clear where that comes from.
Because of what we observe, we can't observe reproduction within the fossil record. We don't know
Re-
if any. We don't know if we find any fossil, we don't know if that reproduced or not. We don't know what
Sure.
it came from. We don't know the course of the millions of years of what preceded and came after it.
When you say we don't know, what do you mean by we don't know? Like we
W-
have to infer it with less direct means than we can do with like a current population that we can observe, that we can, take blood samples from and
I
keep
think
checking, right?
inference, yeah, I think inference is still a stretch. I think it's an assumption. I do. So
Like
like
what's like an
the whale
example?
the whale example, whale evolution is a big one that they talk
Okay.
about. I think it's assumed. Um,
Which
a few
which
things,
part
a
is
few
assumed? Yeah.
issues that I have with that is that first off, the it's considered an intermediate. There's intermediaries, right, between one to the whale. I think it's called like Pakicetus,
Hmm.
and do you remember the name of the other one that's really big in there? Um,
It was like a small horse, and then was that Pakicetus?
no, I think they call it more like a bear dog like structure.
Mm.
But anyways, regardless, first off, we have we have an issue with where we find them in the fossil record. We find the quote unquote more evolved genetic one consistently in quote unquote older, or not more evolved, uh, younger generationally, something from like 40 to 49 million years ago, in actually a lower fossil layer, that it's out of order compared to the one that is supposed to be the quote unquote older population. That's supposed to be anywhere from 46 to 52 million years old. So we have a gap of a good 10 million years, conservatively speaking, depending on who you look at, um, in the wrong direction. So they just kind of throw that out and say, well, I mean, the
What's
populations can
what's the wrong
exist
direction
together.
in this?
The younger population is found in older layers, in the
So
older fossil
so
layer.
when you say
It's not found in the correct time. You have a chronological inversion.
so you have like fossils that are dated to be found in a strata that's dated at like a different timing, or what's the?
Yeah, yeah. It's the they would expect to find them in this way. They would expect to find the older one in the older layer, the younger one in the newer younger layer, but they're actually found in the incorrect layer, in the wrong inversion. So they can't really call it a transitionary fossil because it
Oh,
comes the wrong way. That would be like saying I'm an intermediary between a child and Shaquille O'Neal because I'm
mm-hmm.
halfway morphologically between them. But that
Right.
doesn't
So
doesn't
so when
tell
you're
you
so when
anything.
you're
It's
talking about,
assumed.
so you're saying that a form that looked initially like it might be an intermediary morphologically is not matching up to that
To the time frame,
in
right?
terms of the dating. I mean
Yeah, the
that
whale the
I mean
whale
that
thing
could
is all
happen.
off. And then not only that,
That's
there's a time that it takes in population genetics. There's a certain amount of time that it takes for a random mutation to occur and hold to the point of being able to be passed on. In other words, it has to
mm-hmm.
spread through the
To
population
become
enough so that it
fixed.
becomes
Mm-hmm.
the norm, be
Mm-hmm.
fixed, right?
Mm-hmm.
For the amount of mutations that they're talking about from Pakicetus to a modern whale, it would actually take something more on the order of like 200 to 300 million years, but they're saying that it comes from about 49 million years ago.
I
There's
mean,
there's too many changes to
I
occur
have to say, maybe
for
this
it to
is the
be.
fact that I worked in astrophysics for a while, but a factor of four when you're dealing with those kind of timescales seems like not a big deal, right? So the
I think
total
no, I think
number of
the
accumulated
argument.
mutations is like four times more than
I think I
what's
got that
typical.
argument wrong. I think from Pacus. Sorry, I think it's from Pakicetus to a whale for only or
I've got
one
the
or
chart.
two mutations. One or two mutations to occur. Let me see if I
Sorry,
sent this to.
Pakicetus, Ambulocetus,
Did I send this one to?
Pakicetus,
Here it is.
Pakicetus, Megalodon.
Oh, this one brings up. Never mind. Well, this one. I mean, if we want to talk about two mutations, Mr. Westford, if you would do me the kind favor of pulling up the last one that I sent you, waiting for 2 mutations with applications to regulatory sequences. And this is actually interesting because I like looking at things that are quote unquote pro evolution, like the book that I read on human brain evolution. I find it very interesting because the claims that they make I find to be absolutely absurd. It's just like they just throw these things out there, and they're just like, oh, you know, it's just like something so simple, and I'm like, hold your horses. That's kind of wild. But let's go ahead and scroll down. It's towards the bottom. There's a section that says humans. It's quite a ways down. It says fruit fly, right? I think we just slower. So experimental results. I think that might be a little far, but keep going. There should be a brown section. Humans, there you go. Yeah, that's the section. Oh my word, that's so tiny. My old eyes. Hold on, dearie. Slow down and zoom in for old grandma, please. That is by your side. I kind of want to get past all the noise. Scroll down a little more. Talks about, there it is, multiplying 25 years per generation. There, just that single line. We can contest that. Right at the very top, multiplying 25 years per generation gives 216 million years. I know we just jumped from whales to humans. Someone else, no, right at the very, very top. Multiplying 75, 162 million years. Yeah, this is so. So I'll do a quick little summary on this, and I mean, I wouldn't mind another talk because we're already an hour and something into it, and we're just kind of scratching the surface.
I'd be happy to. If
But
there's super specific things like this, you know, I'm happy to read a paper and.
Yeah, so what these guys are doing is they're responding to Michael Behe. Are you familiar with Behe?
No.
He's a guy who's a proponent of intelligent design, and he talked about population genetics and things like this, and he made a contestation.
Darwinism,
yeah.
Evolution.
Yeah.
Oh,
so these guys are responding to Michael Behe, and they used a fruit fly population and they extrapolated that out to mutations in human populations. So it's interesting here that even by their own admission, what they're talking about is to get 2 mutations that they themselves above, it appears they're talking about what we would just kind of call neutral mutations. In other words, it's going to be enough of a change in the genome that it would be different but not cause any kind of significant change. And I didn't really get a chance to dig fully into this. So, I mean, we could come back to this, but the age that they're talking about, the amount of changes that occur, Mr. Westford, could you scroll up just a little bit so we have a little more context on that highlighted section? They're using this mathematical formula to talk about, we show the 2 coordinated changes. Yeah, see, so it's 2 coordinated changes that turn off one regulatory sequence and turn on another without either mutant becoming fixed or unlikely to occur in the human population. We assume that a rate of 10 to the negative 8th, again, we see Drake, effect blah, 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 and 10/8 because this makes nucleotide diversity 4 and a bunch of sciencey nerd stuff that's really stupid. Again, we assume the transcription factor binding involves an exact match, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, they're just talking about, to take away the nerd speak, it's basically they're going after 2 mutations. One that turns off a regulatory sequence and another to turn on without becoming fixed. And so essentially they take the formula of what they find, and it's 216 million years just for 2 mutations. One to turn off, one to turn on. 260. That's why I said from at the beginning, there's not enough time. And these guys are pro-evolution. These are guys that believe in evolution, and they're trying to argue against Michael Behe, who's arguing against evolution. The numbers don't add up. We didn't evolve 216 million years ago.
Yeah, I feel like I need to know a little bit more detail of what we're
I
talking about
understand.
here, because this is like obviously a very, very,
Very
very
specific
specific
thing.
situation.
I understand. I'm not
Um,
trying to pull a
and
gotcha.
this is around like a
Just saying.
particular assumptions of a particular simulation that this particular paper is performing, according
Yeah.
to people in my chat.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm not trying to pull a gotcha or whatever, but
so
gotcha.
yeah, I mean,
I'm
so
just kidding.
there's one thing that happens that I've seen, where people do calculations around like, okay, like to get these particular mutations, the odds of these occurring in this time scale is like super low. But what they're not accounting for is just a really like basic thing, which is that again we're not trying to like get to some point. If humans were like this, or humans were like this, if we had or our organs in this order or whatever, like there's certain things that physically moving around in the world, it probably makes sense to have like two legs or four or six or eight, but not like five is probably weird. So there's certain things that are probably unlikely to happen.
Starfish would disagree.
Okay, you know what, I take it back. I'm sorry to any of my Starfish viewers. But on the other hand, you guys have amazing regeneration, so can't be too mad. Um, but it's like there is no thing that things had to become a particular way. There's so many different ways that things could have evolved, and so this is like a mathematical issue that I see. I don't know if that's related at all to what this was. That's just what it reminds me of like, oh, to get from this particular thing to this particular thing, it's so unlikely that this exact course happened, but any course could have happened.
I understand that, but it's so what we're talking about is a proposed rate of mutation, and we're trying to extrapolate that out over time,
Mm-hmm.
and we can actually number the differences between a proposed human ancestor and us. So I mean, we've got at least like 1,400 different mutations between at least what we can point out is the number that I came across. If you want to contest that, cool. But that's what I saw in differences in the genome from chimpanzees to us, which I understand. Chimps, we both came from a
Mm-hmm.
similar is what the claim, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but either way, if we want to contest the number, that's fine. But there's still a lot. There's a big difference between us and what an early hominid would look
For sure.
like in the claim. So,
Mm-hmm. We,
um,
we are very different. I mean, um, so I think
really quick here,
yeah.
really
Okay,
quick.
please go ahead.
My point was just going to be that the total number of mutations that we have, there's not enough time. Even if they could line up, I'll grant you for this argument that sure, okay, we can get a mutation that arises to new information, whatever that means. A simple thing, genomic changes, insertions, deletions, rearrangements, whatever. Uh, sure, I'll grant that. But then when we observe things that even look similar to that, there's a certain amount of time that must occur, and the evidence that we have doesn't align with the time that's presented. So just see a mismatch there. It's a big mismatch.
Is that based on this, or do you have like a more um, you know I'm not trying to got you, but I mean, just like, are we just taking this as like an example of that argument, or is there some more kind of general thing that you want to present to make that claim?
There, um, well, the one that I have on numbers and talking about mathematical mutations was more on abiogenesis, but the math we could replace the variables of like cell walls, DNA, RNA, proteins, carbohydrates, etc., with variations from species to species, and it's a list of math. Um, it shows granting mutations per a certain amount of time. The differences from one species to another, get my camera right. You have X number of variations. So to mutate from there to there would take so and so much time. Mr. Westford, if we want to bring it up and just kind of scroll through it really quick.
Just to
Go
jump in
ahead.
quickly before you do that
Sure, man.
is, um, so just reading the conclusion of this paper, um, it's saying one obvious problem is that the Drosophila populations undergo large seasonal fluctuations, providing more opportunities for mutation when population size is large, and a greater probability of fixation of an A mutation during the recurring bottlenecks. Thus, it is not clear that one can reduce to a constant size population. The effective population size computed from the nucleotide diversity is the correct number to use for the constant population size. There's just, so this is, it's concluding
It's
with
an
a lot of caveats
extrapolation.
of saying, here's this very simple model, but there's some very good reasons to believe that, we shouldn't take it as gospel, so to speak, of like, this is the exact rate. It's actually much more complicated than that. So
Yeah, indeed, and I have no problem with that. I was just pointing out
right.
how
Oh yeah,
that's
and
what they were
again,
pointing to with.
so what this is talking about, it's talking about these specific mutations. So the probability of randomly getting these specific mutations, but it could have been any mutation, right?
Is that what it said in that
That's
paper? I thought it.
mm-hmm.
Oh well, I guess yeah. One was a turn off and one was a turn on.
Yeah. So to get these exact mutations, it would take, their simulation would say it might take this long, right? But
Now what's
do you understand
interesting
like
though,
the basic kind of I don't know, logical point, whatever, that it's like, well, it didn't have to be these mutations. It could be any mutation, right?
sure,
Like
yeah.
if they didn't get those
They
mutations
are
in
looking.
time, there's nobody
Yeah,
who would
they
say
are
like, you're
looking
not
for
a real
two
whale.
specific
Screw
mutations,
you,
but
right?
then also, the fact that it goes through seasonal changes decreases the rate of fixed mutation, but increases mutations overall.
No, it's saying increases the rate of fixed mutations.
Oh well, that makes it even worse for humans. Then, if they're extrapolating it to humans, I misheard you. Yeah, I'm trying to look for it right now.
It's
First
difficult
one
to
will
analyze
not
the
have.
situations mathematically. Each of them would increase the rate at which changes occur, and in a case one would need to find a mechanism that changes the answer by a significant factor to alter all our qualitative conclusions. But I don't even know what the purpose of this paper was.
They were trying to argue against Michael Behe, and I'm not sure what Michael Behe's claim was originally. They just said Michael Behe is wrong, and here's why. And they go into it. So say, yeah.
I mean,
let's not. I mean, I know I brought it up, and then let's move on. I wasn't trying to get too bogged down. I was just trying to point out that there are things that are asserted, and I appreciate work like this.
That's
because
directly hitting a challenge. It's not like,
yeah.
No, that's cool.
Yeah, and that's the kind of stuff that I do want to see more being challenged in the evolutionary field, rather than just that's the thing that I like the least. It's not scientific at all to say, oh well, we see this happen, and given enough time, and this is a possibility, and then given such and such population, and it's like, hey, let's really put some rubber to the road and get some numbers in on this. We're talking about fuel availability.
I think that's
and
a very unfair
time.
characterization of the field of biology, that most scientists are, who are working in evolution or just, there is no modern biology without evolution. It's simply just a cornerstone of like understood facts about the world. But there aren't, in general, lots of universities out there with lots of professors chasing tenure, bringing grad students in their lab and saying like, okay, like they're Wile E. Coyote trying to catch a roadrunner. How are we going to prove that there's enough time to get these fossils from, they're really just out there solving like kind of pressing issues in science, and there isn't an orientation to try to say like, oh, what are we? Did you watch?
Step into my dark room. Let
Ren
me
and
tell
Stimpy.
you all the secrets of evolution that we're tricking the people with. You must keep this a secret, or we will
Exactly.
kill you.
Yeah.
It's a
Like
conspiracy.
you need to believe in evolution, or I won't graduate you. Or Ren and Stimpy are like, what are
No.
we gonna do today, Ren? Well, we do every night. Try to disprove the Bible. It's like this isn't kind of rubbing their hands together. This isn't what biologists are focused on. They're focused on
Of course not.
things like again like curing cancer, and it's like in my work I have to use evolution. I have to use the neo-Darwinian one that we were talking about that's looking at
So
changes
let
in
me
allele
ask you this
frequencies.
then.
Yeah.
Okay, since you posed a question to me, is there a possibility of these mutations in codon? Could it be theoretically possible of evolution? Okay, let me ask you the question in reverse. Is it theoretically possible that there's another theory besides evolution that explains all of the data that you have that you're saying evolution has given you guys, but is it possible that there's another theory that's not evolution that could explain that set of data plus the data that things like I'm contesting, like DNA mutations and holding towards a certain center, for lack of a better term. Also, something that could explain the Cambrian explosion would be nice. Is
Yeah,
it
I mean,
possible there's
100%.
another theory?
I would say that it would be akin to, with Isaac Newton, and he was looking at kinematics, and he was looking at, all the stuff you learn in like introphysics. He was basically right, but then it turns out like if you go really really fast, or if you're near like a big like gravitational field or something, it gets a little weirder, right? So it's like we didn't prove Newton like wrong, or it's like, oh, he's dumb and full of shit. He did think that you could turn lead into gold or whatever. So those kinds of
He's
things.
kind of a dumbass there.
We don't teach in school about some of his other things that that he worked on. But we do we do learn calculus, and we do learn kinematics. And then when you get to more advanced stuff, you learn, okay, this cool guy Einstein. They called him that because he was smart, I think. What are you, some kind of Einstein? And it's just
Debatable,
right? But you learn if you go very if you go very fast, you have to deal with like a Lorentz factor, and you have to deal with like relativistic travel. And so it's
right.
absolutely, I mean, within evolutionary study, everybody who's like in that field wants to be the one to like knock it down and be like, no, I've got the new best thing. Stuff like Evo Devo, trying to combine evolutionary biology with developmental biology and understand, how do things evolve, but also like how does that relate to development of like a single organism going through gestation, whatever. Like how does that all relate together? So everybody wants to. It's like a big buck hunter or whatever. The being able to knock down an established theory and put in your new best, shiny bright new thing. That's what everybody wants to. I mean, that's like guaranteed tenure.
I want to be Einstein. Right? No, I want to be Einstein. Yeah. Pick me. I want to be Einstein.
So I think there's an unfair general idea. I don't think you've said anything like this, but I have heard this out there that it's like, oh, it's just this big, cult that you just have to toe the party line. Everybody wants to take it down, right?
Yeah. No, I'm.
So could there be a better thing? 100%, there could be.
Yeah, I can sympathize with evolutionists because creationists are terrible at arguing against evolution. Like, they don't understand any of the specifics, and they'll say things like micro and macro evolution. I'm like, you gotta stop that. You guys gotta stop that. That doesn't, and they really don't understand where the delineation is, and that's why I narrow it down to speciation, why I question even what speciation is in an asexual organism. It doesn't seem clear to me. And then also, I I guess since we're on the sexual asexual thing, what is the proposed theory to explain asexual to sexual reproduction?
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. So, this isn't something I looked into if this is like updated, but what I read on Wikipedia years ago is the Red Queen hypothesis. Are you familiar with that?
No.
So, it's this idea that, um, so um, if you have asexual reproduction, then you have, um, just the mutations that occur, between generations. So, just as the gametes are produced, um, and then if you're, standing next to Chernobyl, I guess your nuts get irradiated, and maybe you can get some new mutations. But in general, it's a relatively low rate. But if you have sexual reproduction, and bacteria, they can swap plasmids, so they can kind of make that happen. But for us, we're mammals. We aren't going to be able to trade DNA with our neighbor, all of our cells. Um, so the ability to reproduce sexually means that you can have people with relatively distinct levels of genetic diversity, and you can swap those around in lots of combinations. You can do homologous recombination, you get even more. And the reason for that is actually disease. So it's actually an arms race with bacteria and viruses that themselves are reproducing very rapidly. And so their ability to potentially come up with some new way. I mean, I just recently had a antibiotic resistant infection that, like, the front line that they give you now, they have to go to the second line, because bacteria are reproducing, and specifically because of the factory farming industry that's like giving lots and lots of antibiotics, that's like creating a lot of superbugs.
Which is not evolution, by the way.
I mean,
it's a broken ribosome.
It's not evolution
generally.
because it sucks for us. It's a negative mutation.
No, for the bacteria. The bacteria, they train. Okay, antibiotic resistance is another evidence. I mean, if we just want to walk through the evidences too at some point, like a breaking. It's like chopping off your arms and being like, "Sweet, I've evolved, so I can't be handcuffed." It's because you don't have hands. That's the same thing going on with the bacteria. The ribosome is broken, so it's not
So why
being
why is
affected by
that
the
not
antibiotics.
why is that not evolution?
Because when you're deforming an already formed organism, that's not what's being proposed in evolution. Evolution is talking about formation of something unique ultimately.
I don't think that it is. I think if I change
Yeah,
something and I'm better adapted to the environment, and then that change gets fixed in my population because it's good for not just me, but it's generally a good idea, and then my that population inherits that change. That seems like evolution. um, the more like again, this is like these the places where evolution and intelligent design, or more kind of like religiously minded perspective, butt heads. I see this pretty consistently. That's not around like evolution per se. It's around these very specific. So it's around things like, are humans descended from other animals, and like, can you get, I don't know, new stuff, like new cool modules out of evolution. It's really like those two specific things that are like the big sticking points. So maybe if we do like another debate, maybe I can do some research around like what are some cool new things that aren't like something being turned off or whatever. But I mean,
well, it's not. That's the thing, is that we can't just point to things being turned off or on. Like, like the moth, you have a transposition of DNA that's already there, but we're talking about it. That's why I brought up that image of the operating system type of thing, is that you're going from, like, essentially like a Mac operating system to a Windows operating system while the computer is running through tiny changes over time, and you don't expect that organism to crash when all of the evidence shows that when we have certain mutations, there's a crash. It crashes or it breaks. I
I
mean,
think it's a
breaking doesn't
very
help.
I think it's a very poor analogy from a computer to an organism.
Why?
Um,
I mean, we're talking about information. If anything, it
mm,
makes it more simple and it's able to be granted more easily because computers are more simple. DNA is far more complex.
it's absolutely way more complex. It's I mean, if you want to look at things that if we want to, I mean, if we want to go into kind of like a intelligent design versus evolution or whatever, so this is something, this is more like a personal than like a kind of like argument that I would bring, but just to share my perspective, the fact that biology is so complicated and messy to me actually makes it look more natural than something that's like put together, right? So if you look at a computer, it's code. It's code that's readable by humans. It's something that it's true. If you mess around with it, if you randomly start altering things, you're basically only ever gonna break things. When you look at organisms and DNA, it's not information in the sense of like it's something that kind of like means something. It directly it's really it's chemistry. It's something that physical changes in the world occur as these things interact, and those physical changes lead to an organism functioning, and chemical changes occur that also lead that to alter. If you're talking about bacteria, if 90% of mutations were deleterious, and 1% of them lead, it's it's a problem to talk about kind of constant rates of these things,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
Because it's like,
yeah,
yeah, in a given moment. So when you're talking
indeed.
about like, you know, let's say for the sake of argument that it's the case, for that bacteria to be able to start eating plastic, they had to switch something off, or they had to like cobble together some stuff that was already there. That's what biology is all of the way down. So much of our genomes are viral insertions. Have you heard of
Hmm.
transposons, lines, spines?
Yeah, but not from species to species. We have different numberings of chromosomes.
Yeah.
That's why a human can't breed with a dog. Our
Well,
chromosomes don't line up.
okay,
And
so that's a great example. So humans and chimpanzees, right? So humans have what 46 chromosomes. Chimpanzees have 48,
yeah, I think so.
right?
Sure. Yeah.
So if you look at human chromosome 8, you see that it has, so typical chromosomes for people in the audience, whatever. You have like a centromere at the middle, and you have telomeres at the ends, and they're like these repetitive sequences, um, and they're hard to sequence. Recently, we've been able to get like full, complete sequencing of the genome, which is pretty exciting stuff. I don't know if you follow. Yeah,
I do.
it's
I do. Yeah.
technologically really really interesting.
Yeah.
Um, but human chromosome 8 has two centromeric regions and
Right.
the
They're
telomeric region
saying
in the
it's
middle.
fused.
And if you look at the DNA, so it looks like it's fused, and if you look at the DNA on that, it looks like the DNA in what's called chimpanzee chromosomes 2A and B, because we're the center of the universe and fuck them. We're gonna label their chromosomes based on our chromosomes.
After us, right? We are the center.
Right.
The whole universe
The whole
is centered on
universe.
us.
The sun rotates around us.
Does
Not
does
just the
it? The
Earth, but
moon's
America specifically. The sun rotates around America.
every yeah, around America. Every conspiracy is real. The moon is both fake, a plasma, and it has a Nazi base on the backside of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's also made of cheese.
Mm-hmm.
We've never been to the moon, except
And
if we
it's a
did, then we've
donut
built
shape
bases
actually.
on the. It's donut shaped. There's a
Yeah.
hole in the middle. Earth is
Mm-hmm.
both hollow and flat and fat shaped like a donut. We're also on the inside and the out. All conspiracies are real.
Balls of
Prove me
ice.
wrong.
But I mean, if you
America.
fuck yeah.
Fuck yeah.
But I mean,
So,
if you look
anyways,
at if you were to approach this problem
can I
as
can I address that chromosomal fusion between humans
sure,
and chimps? And it is often cited as evidence for evolution, but
mhm,
the thing is, when we get into these evolutionary proofs, we tend to really focus in on the things that are similar. Like, oh, look, we have a similarity between humans and chimps, so that must imply universal common descent
mhm.
or ancestral common descent. And well, but then
Well, no,
as soon
wait.
as there's something,
So I do need to interject there. It's not the fact that there's similarities between one species and another. It's the fact that the morphological similarities match the genetic similarities. If you draw a morphological tree, it matches a phylogenetic tree, and the kind of changes that occur are generally not reversed. So if you have a form of respiration, it doesn't like kind of go back and forth. Certain things become fixed as you go
fixed,
down the trees.
right? Yeah.
So
So I mean,
that's
the thing about,
yeah.
yeah, I understand, and I'm still going to say it's an assumed uh, cause. It's an assumed cause that evolution caused that, because they're looking at chromosome 8 being fused, as they
Mm-hmm.
say, and oh, look, that knocks out that extra chromosome that we have between humans and chimps.
Mm-hmm.
But
And it matches
then
the
they
DNA on those two chromosomes.
sure, but then they ignore the fact that the telomeres are completely unique between. It's like, oh, that's not a problem. It's fine. There
What do you mean
doesn't
that
have to
the
be some.
telomeres are completely unique?
The telomere is unique between the chimp's telomeres and the human's telomeres at the fused end of that chromosome. And I
Okay,
have to look into that a little more deeply, but that's what I understand, that there's a unique difference there. That
sure.
it's like, if it's supposed to be the chromosome, fusing together, you'd
Mm-hmm.
expect the telomeres to look a certain
I mean,
similar way, but they
unless
don't.
they mutated, right?
Unless if they mutated as well. Okay, but I think I'd have to look into that a little more too. But that's what I've seen in the argument of like, oh, it's actually not the same, if because
I
now
mean, why wouldn't they
this
mutate?
is but this is what I'm getting at, is it's unfalsifiable. It's Schrodinger's evolution. It's both slow and quick when it needs to be based on the adaptation or not.
Sure.
We'd expect similarity where we see it, and we'd expect uniqueness where we see it. Isn't evolution just a
I
wonderful
mean,
explanatory causing? What I'm
yeah,
saying, what I'm
but that's
saying,
the
but
point
what we're
is that it
seeing,
was developed based on what we see. It's a reasonable conclusion of what we. It is a conclusion. It is saying, okay,
no,
I think this is the explanation for what we're seeing, but it's
y-
the reason that it feels like it's cheating is because it's looking at facts and coming to a conclusion based on them. So that's like
no, no,
the
no. You're
that's the
seeing a
cheat.
pattern. You're seeing a pattern nature, a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Everything has pattern, and I mean, a while back you were talking about how um you find it interesting that I can't remember how you said it, but I was going to bring up the Fibonacci sequence. Are
Mm.
you familiar with how the Fibonacci
Yeah.
sequence applies to nature, and how pretty much everything has that same pattern of, like, like there's
It's like
this
the way
distance
like
here, and then
leaves
the
kind of
distance
spread
from
out.
there to there. There's a yeah, and then the distance. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's the
Yeah.
1.618
Yeah.
ratio and
It's
it's
super cool.
universal, and it's interesting because why is that so universal? It's in everything living.
It's fascinating.
It's in
Or if you look at
physical things.
like the
It's
way
in
lungs, you know how it's like it kind of like goes like big and smaller nose. If you look
yes,
at like I've seen photos of like a road that was driven on and it's like there's like a main path and people like I think there are fascinating beautiful
and it's
things about nature and math and there might be something in the human brain about the way that we use math that is kind of based on utility for like understanding the world. It's truly fast. I'm with you there. Like I'm awed by these things. Don't think that because
sure.
I'm like a naturalist or whatever. I'm like, oh,
No,
it's
I
all
don't. I don't think.
sterile, boring, whatever. Like,
No, I don't. I
um,
don't think that about
okay.
people at all. I mean, I think atheists, agnostics, whoever, anybody into science and stuff, I think they are in awe of it. I think that's fine. Again, the thing that I'm questioning is cause. Cause. the when we see patterns, it doesn't matter if it's origin of species, origin of life. We see a pattern. Our universe is very patterned. Um, and it's the Fibonacci sequence thing. Mandelbrot sets expand beyond biology. It goes into the way that lightning bolts diverge. It goes with the way that water converges coming down a mountain, coming
It
into a
goes to the way a
stream.
double
That
pendulum swings. Yeah.
it's
Chaos
crazy. It's
theory.
go
Yeah.
the way that galaxies spiral, the gaps between the arms and how many arms there would be. It's just wild, dude.
Yeah.
Like, so I mean, you have certain people arguing that
As that phrase, math is
evolution,
the language of nature, right?
yeah, yeah, and that evolution occurs because there's an ingrained physical law of this Fibonacci sequence that all atoms operate based on this universal physical law of the Fibonacci sequence. So, like, if we have individual hydrogen atoms, they're going to come together based around this physical law of creating a ratio. And it just kind of builds from there and builds from there. And I think that's an interesting thought. But again, it begs the question, where does this universal immaterial law come from? Because now
Well,
we've
I would say
expanded
it's
into another field.
something like atoms in a molecule arrange themselves in a certain way, not because of like something law of Fibonacci, but because of their properties and the physical laws that govern that matter. And the fact that we see this up and down, I think is the fact that there's physical laws consistently across the universe. If you want to say where do those laws come from, that's also a very fun conversation.
Yeah.
Might be a little bit out of scope for us, but I'm happy to. I find that
Well,
stuff
I mean, it's
fascinating.
yeah, it's an immaterial universal law essentially, but then it's expanded upon in matter. Um, it's as much as we try to, there's really no way getting around these philosophical questions when it comes to
Why are we
kind of
here?
the diff. Well, I mean, also like how does a material particular being such as a human being access immaterial universal laws such as mathematics or the laws of physics or logic?
So things like the laws of physics, I think, are built up enough from those other things that I think they don't require as kind of special of an explanation. But things like logic and math do seem to be a little bit like kind of hardwired into our brain, like a kind of capacity to mathematically and logically reason. Those seem like pretty fundamental to human capacity. There's Noam Chomsky wrote a book, Why Only Us. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but it's specifically trying to understand, how could human language developed. I mean, his whole thing is like universal grammar.
Hmm.
Trying to understand if there's like a
Language, yeah.
universal way that human languages are kind of built or structured, or like what, it seems like it's not just the case that you can make up a human language that's like whatever. It seems like there's certain ways that human languages develop. There's certain like
Yeah.
certain ways that we put things together. There are like weird out there languages. I don't think it was successful in creating universal grammar. But he's
I
somebody I
know,
would
and
look to
that's
for some like hardcore research into understanding like how does the human brain actually work when it comes to language. We have kind of like internal and external language. So if you think some thoughts to yourself in like English or whatever, that's actually external language. That's a different type of processing than the way that
right.
you like reason differently. So
Right. We talk
yeah.
about in philosophy there's the signifier and the
Oh,
signified, right?
some
So the
Hegel or
language
Khan or yeah.
language would be the signifier, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like if I say the word apple,
Yeah.
I'm signifying an apple, the concept of an apple. Imagine a 3D rotating apple in your head, and that's the thing that we're
I can, but
trying to
apparently some
convey.
people can't.
Some people
Aphantasia.
can't. I can, and actually I can see it in the fourth dimension as well. I can see the outer skin and the seed on the inside all at the same time. Imagine that. Yeah, take that, science.
Hyper apple.
So anyways, yeah, the concepts themselves transcend the language, and it's actually really astounding to kind of bring this back around to evolution. It's pretty amazing that we can do this. Regardless of if you want to attribute it to evolution or not, I think it's actually really hard in the time frame that we're talking about. If we're talking about 200 to 300,000 years ago, that humans became humans in some sense, at least, that we now have our 4 or 5 year old children are able to understand deeper concepts than what seems like literally any other creature on Earth. I mean, it seems like dolphins are pretty close. And Mr. Westford, if you will, I have an interesting little graph
Octopus.
here to show human uniqueness. I do like the human brain, like I said, and we can talk a little bit about the brain and intelligence and stuff. Mr. Westford, there is that one black page with that graph that is sideways. I think if I pull it up here, I can tell you what order it is. It would be the second one, the second link that I sent you. It's black and it's got those bars that go sideways. I think it's super interesting. That's the guy. I don't know if we want to read it right now. Let's just go ahead and look at this graph here. This is if you can, yeah, that's the one. So this is a graph showing brain to body weight ratio. And what he's pointing out here is as body weight increases, we see a decrease in the ratio of brain to body weight. The ratio, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So like squirrels have a very tiny body and a very large brain for their size. So their ratio of proportionate body weight is like almost 2.5. Their brain is like almost 2.5 compared to their body weight. And then as you go down, Cebus and rhesus monkeys.
I'm not sure what the scale is.
Come again?
I'm just curious what this scale is. It might not be relevant, but
It's the scale is the ratio, in weight, body weight.
The ratio of what?
So like
to what?
What do you mean?
Like what is it a ratio of?
Brain size, brain weight to total body weight. So they divide the brain's weight compared to total body weight, or as approximate.
It's saying the brain is like twice as
2.5. I know
twice
that's
as massive, twice as heavy as the.
And this is from a book called Human Brain Evolution.
Yeah.
This is from a evolutionary biologist named Cunan. He's challenging the out of Africa hypothesis in this book. Okay, just so you're aware of the context and everything. Can I open this in a new image so I can read it better? It's because my phone is so small. Whoa. Not letting me zoom in.
I mean, I can see the trend for sure.
So anyways, yeah, you see the trend, I mean, rhesus, patus, baboon, those all get bigger bodies and their brain is smaller relative to their bodies. Leopard, and then Homo sapiens, boom. Mm-hmm. We have our brain to body ratio almost as big as a squirrel.
Yeah.
Again.
George.
It's freaking massive, dude. Like and if we scroll, or no, what is it? I think it's the next page. Yeah, if we go to the next page, I think it's interesting. Mr. Westford. Next slide, please, and zoom in. It's just past the gap. Just past the gap, just for the sake of this. One needs to turn the clock back to 5 to 7 million years ago. For the previous 45 million years or so, land-based mammals had continuously exploited the richness of the coastal habitats and food resources. First, they would have eaten the seaweed's mussels. How do we get a Carl Sagan voice? First, they would have eaten the seaweeds, mussels, cockles, oysters, and fish stranded in rocky pools when the tide receded. Slowly, they became more adventurous. Is this the one that I was thinking of? Goodness,
This
it's
is
so
the thing you were
small on my
talking about,
phone.
how maybe seafood was the fuel
Yeah,
for
nice story.
mega brains?
Yeah, D8. The limitations of. I don't know if we want to spend a whole lot of time on this.
Well, what's
There
the
was somewhere in here that was talking about time that I thought was really interesting. CTV. I think it's the next one that I took. It's kind of an interesting story. Go to the next slide instead. Next slide, please. There you go. There's now good documentation of great apes knuckle walking down to rivers and then standing perfectly upright when they enter the water. Indeed, at the end of a BBC TV film celebrating Darwin's birth, Sir Richard Attenborough showed a film of apes walking upright in the river. He made the comment that this was how the chimpanzees took their first steps to become humans. The line that came down to Homo sapiens probably wandered down a river and came to an estuary. They would have seen the seabirds feasting on shellfish. It would not take a bright little primate long to recognize the wealth of food ready for the picking. Even a pregnant woman would have been able to feast off the seafood with little effort, and in doing so would have fed her fetus with a rich source of DHA, iodine, and other trace essentials. Some people criticize the coastal origin by saying that humans could have obtained their DHA from brains and marrow of the dead animals. Well, a small brain is not going to go far among the ladies, even if it was still in an edible condition when they got it back after their endurance run. The evolution of humans at a coastal rather than a land-based hunting system is now well explained by the evidence on omega-3 PUFA, and in particular on DHA and neural gene expression. He cites it. DHA is by far the dominant omega-3 fatty acid in the brain. Preformed DHA is far superior for brain growth and development compared to its synthesis from plant-based alpha-linoleic acid, even in rodents. So I find that really interesting that what he's pointing out here is that this is the whole point of the book, is that there's far more constraints on how we became human than what was previously thought. We essentially need to have a large amount of DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, which is like a super common omega-3 fatty acid in animals, as opposed to, he points out, alpha-linoleic, which is plant-based. And our bodies are kind of okay at synthesizing it, but it's not really enough. We have like a 2 to 3% on average. I think some people are better at it, but still that it's such a small amount. Everyone's always talking about, oh, you need your omega-3s, dearie, for your brain. It's true.
But I mean,
So
there are humans living now. Um, if you look at like Bedouins, or Bedouins like 100 years ago, or maybe um, you know living with like animals that they're herding from one place to another, drinking their milk, butchering them, eating some amount of plants, far away from seafood. I'm not 100% sure what's the takeaway from this as it relates to
the the amount of
yeah
things that would need to
our
come
conversation.
together, and this is what I was talking about, working as a system. He carries on in this book to talk about how you need a multitude of things to come together and mutate together. Um, so first, you need uh, a larger brain. You need the food source available, which would be, he argues, really only coastal
Sure, could be
creatures
could be
have
coastal.
enough. Um, if we look at, like, I mean, we can debate that a little bit. I mean, there's like ruminant animals that kind of do, but definitely not in the same amount as coastal
Certainly wasn't
fish.
grass.
Well, I mean, ruminants ruminants do produce DHA in their meat if they're fed on grass only. They
I see.
don't
Us
produce
eating animals.
us eat
Yeah.
hunting down ruminants like bison or ox or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyways, just talking about the constraints on going from an ape-like creature to a human-like creature, the constraints would be you need to obviously mutate a larger sized brain. You need to mutate in the gut the capacity to be able to transport omega-3 fatty acids more easily. He talks in here about gut mutations that occurred. The mother needs to mutate larger hips so that she doesn't crush the brain in birth. The mother needs to start producing more docosahexaenoic acid uh, when she's nursing, because if she doesn't feed that baby's brain, then the parts of the brain that have now mutated to become larger and more complex, they will atrophy because the food is not available for it. So that mutation would actually become deleterious if the mother is also not mutating more DHA in her milk. I can't remember if it was, I don't think it's in this book. I think it was in a different book that was talking about how our shoulder angle is actually really important for us to have the mobile flexibility and what do you call it? Dexterity to be able to hold a human infant, their brain so carefully so it doesn't damage, because their brains are so large, they're actually prematurely born in a sense, right? We all know this about the soft spots in the brain as compared to other animals.
And that's partly for easier exit through the birth canal.
Yeah, right, because it gets squished and everything. And I think that iodine is another aspect that he talks about even here, and other trace essentials that really can only come from the coastal line. I mean, those are like, that's not even the whole picture, but we're already talking about 6 things that need to mutate together in a way that works together. So like, I mean, just hip mutation itself wouldn't alone do it. It has to mutate in a way that would actually allow the brain, it would have to create a space in the canal for the brain to make it through without actually being damaged.
So do you see? So do you see how we've approached this kind of backwards? Like these things had to have happened to get here.
Well,
right?
How else would you propose that it would be?
So these are things that we observe have happened, but something different could have happened, right?
So you're saying evolution is true because we're here?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, that's right. It's not saying that it had to be
It's a
like
logical
this.
fallacy of
It's
assuming the
just saying that it
consequent
is.
again.
Oh god, is my
Okay, so have I not been saying this the whole time? It's assuming the consequent. That's a logical fallacy. It's special pleading and assuming the consequent.
I'm not saying that, like, evolution is true because things exist. What is my mic doing?
Unfalsifiable.
I'm just gonna leave this
I think I've made my case.
Much better. Okay. Sorry for everybody who's been dealing with low audio. Well, it's literally changing on the fly. Why is this happening?
Oh, it sounded good before. Now it's sounding weird.
I'm literally looking at the volume.
Yeah, loud,
it's just
quiet.
Going down.
Stop changing things. It was working fine before.
Oh my god.
The audio situation is evolving before our eyes.
Oh, Jesus. In a
Evolution.
positive or negative way. I don't know. If you don't want to hear me, maybe it's positive.
I concede. Evolution is.
I'll just keep tapping it up as it goes down.
Dustin takes an L today. Dustin takes an L.
Clearly, somebody's trying to censor me. So I'm obviously. Oh my god, what is this? I might have to like unplug and replug it. We'll see. I'm obviously not saying. Okay, I'm just gonna do this real quick. It's too strong. Okay. I'm obviously not saying like, oh, evolution has
No,
to
we
be
can't hear
true.
you.
Wait, really? You can't hear me?
You're muted. Your
That's
button
weird.
is muted. Hit the.
Press unmute, bro.
Test. Okay.
There you go. We
This
got you.
is going ham. Ghosts. Um, so I'm obviously not saying like, oh, humans exist, therefore evolution is true. What
We
what
can
I'm
hope
saying
not.
what I'm saying is that um, you can't talk about like, oh, it's crazy that these exact things had to happen and they had to happen together to get to where we are now. We got to where we are now because it was possible for these things to happen. If we didn't evolve, so you were asking, what would it look like if if evolution wasn't true? What would the null hypothesis be? Well, why would we need all this weird stuff of like hips being a certain way and getting food from a certain specific thing and the brain being able to get soft and then harden later. um, why would we need all these weird kind of like hacky fixes to biology? Oh my god. Okay,
Sorry. Yeah.
I'm just gonna turn this up when it goes down. This is bizarre.
It's wild.
It's stable. I'm just gonna not touch anything.
Well, that's so. So while you figure that out, yeah. Why would we need a null hypothesis? Because that's what science
no,
is.
no, 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 no. I didn't say no, no. No. I said the opposite. I said, why would we need all these weird, hacky fixes to be able to birth, more modern humans versus humans, a few 100,000 years ago? Why would we need all these fixes if we just perfectly, appeared out of nowhere? If we fell out of a coconut tree, um, if we
I'm
if
not.
we if we didn't evolve from anything, if we just appeared one day, then why would we need all these weird hacky fixes, right? Does that question make sense? Do you understand, like
No, I
what
don't
I'm
because
getting at?
I'm. Well, no, I don't understand that question because I'm doing an internal critique on evolution here and showing how it is necessary for the claim that we came from an ape-like ancestor 200, 300,000 years ago, that for the things from them to what we are now, there are biological constraints. That if one aspect of our morphology or uh, physiology changes, then other aspects necessarily need to change. Otherwise, that mutation becomes harmful to us. But if other things can mutate at the same time
Mm-hmm.
and at the same um, degree, even,
Yeah.
or specific way, because I mean, there's a wide potential of how hips could mutate, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can have ball socket mutations, you can have raising, lowering, I mean, you can have curvature changing, curving inward,
Yeah.
outward. There's all sorts of potential mutations, and it just so happened that in that short amount of time, morphologically, mutationally speaking, that's a lot of adjectives,
Mm-hmm.
that they all came together in a way to bring us from there to there. I'm not saying that there's a direction. I'm saying that the claim is that we did go from here
Yeah.
to here,
Mm-hmm.
right? So then I'm
That path
critiquing that.
was navigated somehow.
Right,
That's the
right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Somehow
so I'm
this
I'm
thing led.
critiquing that.
So what's the I guess I haven't heard what's the issue exactly. Like multiple things had to have happened at the same time.
And in a certain amount of time, because the claim is within
Mm-hmm.
300,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
There's in a certain way, yeah, it's from what we observe, even in our most generous estimates of, I mean, even when we apply environmental pressures, we just don't get this many mutations
So it's the you think
of
that the
this
rate of
degree.
mutation to get from point A to point B would have to be higher then
Yeah,
then makes
I
sense.
think, I mean, it anywhere like if we're going to grant that all those things could mutate and come together, it seems like humans would have had to diverge from an ape-like ancestor a lot further than 300,000 years ago. I mean, I don't even think 300 million years ago. If we start to add up all the differences between humans and apes, I mean, I'm just talking about
So
like six
so
things
humans I
here
think are apes, but you mean from other like extant apes?
from the yeah, I'm using from apes as a
Our
general
common ancestor
from
with
our common ape-like ancestor.
yeah, our common ancestor
I'm
with
just saying it
extant
shortly.
apes is not 300,000 years ago. It was much longer than that. That's like modern humans to like early humans.
To early humans.
Yeah, it's like 300,000 years.
What I've read was that was no, from early humans to modern humans is, well, I mean, early humans now.
To like
What are you talking about?
chimpanzees
Like
is
Homo
like
erectus? Are you talking about like Homo erectus to now? I'm not
um,
very good at the paleontology thing, to
let
be
me see.
honest. I like getting more into biology. I like biology better than
Yeah.
paleontology, that's why I like talking with you, because I mean I think you like the
I mean,
biology
Homo
better as well.
erectus lived between 1.6 million and 100,000 years ago. Some estimates.
Yeah, even a million is not
Um,
enough,
so
because
so
some of
why do you think that? I guess would be my question. Because to me million years, I don't know, million years, 100 that like that. How do you have like a gut feeling about what's like an appropriate amount of
because of
time for?
well, I mean, let's take like Lenski's long-term E. coli experiment. Are you familiar with that one?
I've heard of it. Uh huh.
I can't remember exactly how many generations he went through,
Mm-hmm.
um, but essentially, even after a long amount of time and messing around with a whole lot of things, he still just had E. coli.
Okay.
They do talk about a citrate plus mutation,
Mm-hmm.
but that was actually a transporter that was already present and just became activated. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
exactly why. I guess why it got so blown out of proportion was because E. coli doesn't usually eat citrate, but it
Okay.
did, and but it
So
it's
so that's an
still
experiment with E.
it's
coli. How does
available
that relate to? So he had E. coli in a lab, and they
to try
didn't.
to show mutations over generations of what's possible, of how many could we get possible mutations over a certain amount of generations. And I don't know how many generations he said it
Well,
ran.
wait. There's a really critical thing to distinguish here, which is the rate of mutations that the rate of germline mutations. That's the rate of mutations that you could pass down, and then you have a huge amount more complexity as we're talking about with sexual reproduction and homologous recombination that introduces a huge amount of variation. But that's very distinct from how much change there will be, right? So if you have like an organism in a very stable area for a really long time and they don't have a culture and they're not like doing stuff, maybe they won't change that much. Or there's living fossils that are just perfect, like horseshoe crabs have are pretty much just a living fossil that either they haven't changed or things keep evolving to fill that really specific niche and looking really similar. And maybe those are God's perfect creations and they're just beautiful and they're perfect. They don't have to change. Horseshoe crabs are pretty amazing. I don't know if you've ever got to see one in person, but they're kind of wild.
They're
Um,
wild. I haven't seen one in person, but I've seen
they're
videos. Yeah.
they're so cool. I got to like pet one in an aquarium.
Hmm.
um, and if you see them on the beach and they're flipped, you can flip them back over like a turtle. Um, but I mean, if you have humans and they're moving around and they're learning how to hunt different things and they're evolving or they're developing new languages and they've got like cultures going on, like I would imagine that they might change much more dramatically than some E. coli that's already it's kind of doing its thing. Like why would it change, right?
Sure, and right, and you argued that sexual reproduction creates more mutations.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean,
It,
asexual E. coli.
it creates more
So
diversity. Yeah.
it ran 75,000 generations.
Mm-hmm.
which is quite a long time. I don't know what that would be in human time. I mean, if we say 20 years, what's 20 times 75? 20,000 times 75.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, do you recognize that you're currently saying that humans couldn't have evolved in this way from during this period of time because we have this particular experiment with E. coli where it didn't happen to evolve. It didn't happen to change at that high of a rate.
What I'm saying is to say anything other than what we've observed is begging the question. And
I don't
what
think
I'm
that's
what I'm also
accurate.
saying, yeah, it's begging the question because the thing in question is if speciation can occur, and we don't have evidence of that.
Well,
When
no,
we talk about
it's not begging the question. It's where we're putting down a hypothesis and we're saying, okay, how does this fare at explaining the information that we see versus some alternate explanation, right? And what we're seeing is it turns out to work really well as a model. That's not begging the question.
This is what I don't understand, though. I mean, we're back to this again. You're seeing patterns.
Mm-hmm.
You're seeing things going on, and then you're saying, "Well, evolution did it," and then you carry out those patterns, and you go, "Isn't evolution just a wonderful tool for us?"
Yeah.
I don't see that gap. I don't see how that gap is bridged. What I see on the normative level is you're observing patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Our universe is patterned. You can extrapolate out those patterns and find it. That does not point to the causal mechanism of a large amount of mutations adding up through generations leading to speciation.
So there's this phrase that I really like, which is that no model is true, but some models are useful. So when I think about evolution, I think about it as a model. I don't think like evolution is like this thing that did
Now,
these
are we
things.
talking Victoria's Secret, or are we talking, what kind of model are we talking here?
No, more of like a high fashion model. So it would be like pants up to here and like
Oh,
a
okay.
scarf on your head. I don't know.
So like a Steve Urkel kind of
Yeah,
look.
exactly. That's the
Nice.
kind of model.
Nice.
Right, but I don't think of evolution as like, oh, it's this like thing that exists that did this stuff. It's a name that we put on a series of observations that we're like, okay, well, we see. So it is based on kinds of things that we see and extrapolating into the future. Extrapolating into the past is definitely the thing that seems to have the most friction when it comes to other worldviews. So something like, oh hey, we've observed the flu mutating at this rate, and I think we've got to have flu shots every so often. We project the rate of mutation for the next flu season to be like this. You should probably get a flu shot. Like most people don't have some kind of visceral issue with that because that's like, okay, you're just kind of seeing something and you're like, okay,
We don't.
that kind of fault.
We don't.
I mean,
Am I the only one? I know there's people in the chat that will.
Okay, forget I said the V word, but but it's the kind of it's the detective looking at a crime scene that gets people a lot more kind of like engaged into like, okay, you're saying that humans and chimpanzees have a common ancestor, and humans evolved from some lower form of ape, but we're awesome, and apes are they're great, but they're not like building skyscrapers and stuff. They're not building Minecraft. They're certainly.
Do you think that people are arguing against evolution because there's some kind of either theological or philosophical issue and being like, oh, we're related to apes. No, I'm better than an animal kind of thing. Like,
That's
is
been
that where
my
you think that comes
experience
from?
broadly.
Okay.
I've talked to a lot of people.
Yeah, but scientifically though, there are a lot of scientists that are like, this is problematic, man. There's things that we're seeing, There's
So
things
what's
that we're
like an
seeing that are probably
example of
well,
something that scientists point to as being actually like a challenge within
well,
evolution? Because I mean, there's tons, right? Obviously, there's
yeah,
lots of things,
yeah,
but not
like the
fundamentally to the idea that like the Earth is old or life is old or different species are interrelated. There's questions about.
well, they don't tend to
Um,
care about that generally. It is
mhm,
the people that I've seen um talking about it come from a variety of fields. Dr. James Tour being a synthetic organic chemist. He makes organic chemicals from synthetic materials.
mhm.
Uh, he argues against the origin of life stuff.
Dr.
Um,
James Turo,
tour,
Tour.
like Tour de France,
Oh, Tour.
like riding a
Oh,
bicycle.
yeah.
He's
I
on tour.
might. I don't want to announce anything prematurely, but I might have a conversation with him
Oh,
in
that'd
the
be
near future.
awesome,
Yeah.
dude. No, that'd be great if you do. Definitely message me if I happen to miss it. That'd be
Yeah.
great.
100%.
I would
Yeah.
love that because I was I can't keep. I mean, I'm not in that field, dude. This is a hobby for me.
Mhm.
So I try and glean what I can when I can. Um, but he's arguing a lot against the origin of life stuff.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, are you familiar at all with the origin of life, abiogenesis,
I mean,
positioning
tiny bit. I'm
theories,
trying
and
to brush up a little bit in preparation. But again, I mean,
yeah,
he's a synthetic chemist. That's his wheelhouse. So
yeah.
I've studied
He's dealing with
some
like
of this, but
400-500 page papers of just full
hmm
of chemistry. It's like
yeah.
it's
So if
it's
he says, "Oh, this
mind-boggling.
reaction occurred," well, I'm like, "Okay, that's fine." Sounds good. Um, I
Yeah.
mean, so I know what I've read and what I've gone to lectures and heard different people talk that there's like a DNA world, an RNA world, uh, metabolomic world, and like a membrane world, and
Carbo
there's
and carbohydrate, I think, is a
carbohydrate
common one too. If
world.
they're yeah, there's
So kind
they
of like
all
what came first,
right. There's all
and
constraints of which came first, and
hmm
it's a problem because as soon as you pinpoint one came first, now you've set yourself on a time limit
hmm
because these things, they degrade rather rapidly depending
hmm
on what you're talking about. Some within a couple weeks, some you get a half a year, and then they've degraded
hmm
before they can combine with the other parts that they need. And I mean, yeah, I think the membrane world is probably one of the smallest ones in terms of uh
adherence or
consensus.
consent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
consensus. Yeah, I think
It
I think
seems like
RNA
yeah.
RNA and carbohydrates tend to be the largest
hmm
consensus
Yeah.
of what they
It seems like the strongest because, I mean, RNA does it all. It can store information and it can perform functions, um,
yeah,
and the kind of
and we're
straight
not even
like
close. We're
straight
not even
metabolomics is
close.
interesting
Like
because you see like
we've built
crystals
like
grow.
oh sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
My
Well,
bad.
yeah.
I cut you off.
Yeah.
I'm
I was just
sorry.
saying like the metabolomics first is super interesting because it's like what if you just have stuff kind of like growing, and then information gets introduced later, some ability to mutate. You have like crystals. Like crystals are fascinating because it's actually a little bit difficult to define life in a way that excludes crystals
Hmm.
because they reproduce and they change based on their environment, in terms of how they reproduce. Obviously, you
And
can look
then
at them and you can distinguish pretty easily, but from like a definitional point of view, they're really fascinating.
right, and if you're talking with Dr. Tour on that, he's going to bring up homochirality if
Mm,
you know, if you bring up crystals, I mean, actually, even if anything that you bring up, if you bring up any kind of aminos, he's going to talk about homochirality,
mm,
how it's just we're so far from it. How even in the most pure lab conditions, we don't even get close to creating 100% homochiral products. We get like 20% of what we need, and
so
then
how
the
does
other
that
side.
relate to abiogenesis? This is a useful preview. You're giving me some.
Yeah. Well, because life is built off of homochiral products, homochiral aminos, I can't remember if he did say for carbohydrates. I was trying to brush up on it a little bit because I wasn't sure if you were gonna if you were gonna get into if we were going to get into it because I knew you were in cancer research, so I thought we'd be talking about cellular stuff a lot more than morphological things. So it's pretty interesting. But anyways, dude, my computer is just turn
Our
it off.
tech is just going crazy here.
It's just my okay, on off. Anyways, yeah, for the audience, chirality. Chiral is the Greek word for hand, so handedness. My right hand is symmetrical to my left hand, but they're not the same, right? Like you
And
line them up
you
like
can't
this, they're
make them the
not.
same.
It's not symmetrical. Even if I line my hands up like this to where my thumbs match, I'm looking at the back, and here I'm looking at camera at the front, right? So there's a symmetry, there's a mirror image, and in chemistry they end up being completely different chemicals ultimately. I mean, there's some that are functionally the same, like interestingly enough, glucose, the most common carbohydrate, is generally it functions the same whether it's right-handed or left-handed in terms of its chirality. But other things like amino acids need to be chiral. The crystals that go along with life there, they need to be homochiral. They can only be one-handed a certain way. And whenever we try and get into the lab, we have an issue to where we make these things. And in natural biology, what we observe going on is we observe about 100% production of these things. And even if there is like a byproduct, it gets taken away. There's something to take away this extra byproduct and utilize it somewhere else. But the conversion of these things is just phenomenal. It's way beyond what we can do in a lab, and it always comes out 100% homochiral. But in a lab, there's like 4% to 20%, and then you have the other-handedness for the remaining aspect of it, the part that you don't want. And on top of that, you end up having a ton of toxic byproducts that need to be filtered off. And it's like in a prebiotic earth, those things don't exist. You don't have that kind of separation mechanism. You don't have a filtration system. And it takes a lot of work for us, even in a lab. But we're talking about very, very, very crude basics for how we get from just a mixture of soup and chemicals to a formation of something that is extremely organized, extremely clean, self-replicating, and it also contains information. And the information is also self-regulating in the sense that when mutations come in, they get weeded out and separate, and then they can. But also, the mutations are allowed in some cases, like the insertions, deletions, so on and so forth. It's like this crazy, crazy complex system that just popped up. It has to. In the large scope of, we're talking billions of years on Earth. In the large scope of things, we're talking a half a year that when one thing pops up, like say carbohydrates, you get a pile of the chemicals come together and you have carbohydrates. Now you also need to have something else like RNA come along and feed on it and begin reproducing from a completely different chemical soup. They have to come together, and it has to happen within the time frame, otherwise they're degraded and useless. So the constraints are very, very, very precise.
The rates have to add up. That the generation and decoherence are occurring kind of at the right time scales.
Time and location, because we're talking about.
It's probably like volcanic vents, right? That's usually what people are talking
That's
about.
what they kind of say, but we have an issue with the volcanic thing because there's a lot of agitation, there's a lot of contamination, and there's also an issue where a lot of the intermediaries need to go through a heating phase, a cooling phase, and then be brought back in to the heating phase again to start the next reaction. I can't remember exactly what it is. If you want to get a full kind of understanding of Dr. Tour's stuff, look at his abiogenesis series, and also to see the way that he argues things, look at his debate with Professor Dave Farina. Professor Dave is not even a scientific professor. He's a music professor, which I actually have my bachelor's in music education, so I guess I'm not too much different than him.
Oh my god, this one's like 9 hours long. Wow.
The abiogenesis series.
Yeah.
It's awesome, dude.
Wow.
Plus, there's also a little bit of stuff you can skip, like the first 5 or 10 minutes. It has a constant recap of talking about the motivations for the series, so it's like, oh, I'm just gonna skip ahead 10 minutes, and it goes pretty quick.
Yeah. I mean, it's cool. I mean, yeah, there's people like him who are scientists and do science, and in this case, he disputes um, the likelihood of abiogenesis having occurred, and I know that he's a Christian, and there's people like Francis Collins, who's the head of the NIH, who's a very devout Christian, and is like, yeah, there's no contradiction between my faith and evolution as a theory. So I think there's definitely different types of people out there. I mean, I expect that what he's going to say about this is probably going to be really well reasoned, because it seems like he's a very serious chemist. I'd be curious to hear what he has to say.
I mean, it really is less about the faith for myself as well, because there was a period where I left Christianity essentially, in a simple way of saying it. I was like, well, anything could be the truth. I just want the truth, right? So I spent a good 4 or 5 years outside of the Christian church, and this was the time that I read Human Brain Evolution. I'm like, all right, I really want to understand evolution. I want to see all the pros. I want to understand as much as I can and look into it. And I'm still like, I don't know, man. I add up the, what do you call it? The precision, I guess, the precision of biological mechanisms, and they're like at a cellular level. There's essentially a universe of its own going on in there.
Yeah.
It's
wild,
and all of that stuff adds up essentially to create just this wide diversity of creatures, and I just don't. It just doesn't make sense to me that with what is proposed, it's true. Now, if we were to rework evolution in a very large way, we'd have to make it more believable in terms of some kind of common ancestry. There would have to be a lot of things to add up. I mean, we'd have to get a really good explanation on abiogenesis. Would be very convincing. We'd have to get a really good explanation on the Cambrian explosion. We'd have to get, and then there's also, I forget the names of them, but there are 2 other population explosions in the history. They're less popular, but I know that there are 2 more after the Cambrian explosion. It's just like boom, all of a sudden, like everything's there. It's like, holy crap! Like we're just finding everything together. It's, see, and isn't it nice to talk to a Christian who's not just like, well, I'm not gonna do that, I'm not doing this, and
no,
I mean,
you're
like,
clearly very well read.
Well, thank you
on this topic, and I can see that
don't mind.
You've thought deeply about it, and
I'm a lot of Christians really try to attack the time aspect of it.
Yeah.
And they say there's not enough time. The earth is like 10,000 years old in the Bible, and we look at carbon dating and other sorts of dating, and I don't believe in those, but I'll grant them for you for the sake of argument.
Okay. I was pleasantly surprised when you were like, "Oh, cool! No, we can date things." Wait, so
I just grant it. I just grant it. I'm like, I don't want to quibble over it. I'll just grant it.
Sure. Well, if you're looking at internal consistency of some theory, then it doesn't matter whether you think that happened, if that wraps up together to say that, then you're
That's
that's
exactly
very
what I'm
smart.
trying
Yeah.
to argue.
Hmm.
Yeah, I want to take as scientific of an approach as I can and argue against evolution on an internal scientific
Hmm.
critique. Which I mean even scientifically we can argue against the rise of the dates of the earth but it just becomes such a tangent. It's a tangent.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like geology. Rocks are boring. Rocks are boring. I'm sorry, Brian. Rocks are boring. But I like biology.
I
I think
come
it's
from
fun.
an astrophysics background, and
Oh,
going into biology from that, where you have like physics, an electron is an electron is an electron, right? You have like, all the particles and forces that you're ever going to be working with, you can just write down on a single sheet. And then you go into biology and you have to deal with like, what's going on in a cell is just it's horrific. I mean, it's too much. It's too much,
and it's
right? So,
and that's what I'm talking about. And like even if even if we grant abiogenesis, going from going from one species to another, even if in divergence, it's just like there's such a big gap. In terms of what we see and we observe, there's a gap genetically speaking. The differences in the cell, the chromosomes, the way that things function, the way that proteins are folded and formed and transported, and the precision in all this. And are you familiar with um, glycalization?
oh gosh, no.
It's uh it's another aspect that I was just reading about on um they call them glycans. Um they're sugar molecules that attach onto DNA,
Oh,
and the RNA
sure.
the RNA
Mm-hmm.
reads the glycans. So like the DNA is here and the RNA comes along to read
Oh,
before
sure.
it gets sent off
No,
to
I'm
build, but
familiar with
then
this a little bit.
the glycan itself changes its form as I understand
Mm-hmm.
it. And it's like we don't have a understanding of the mechanism of why the so like in a fetus, it's like the RNA comes along and it's the glycan is shaped a certain way and the RNA reads is like, okay, let's go build a heart. And then it comes back and the glycan is different and it's like, let's make some eyes. And it's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
let's go make some eyes. And it's like, well, why does the glycan change? Where's the feedback mechanism to point? And it's just I mean, if we can
It's
find it,
wild,
cool.
yeah.
It would it doesn't prove or disprove anything either way in my mind exactly, other than just being like it would disprove the claim, I think, that these things can spontaneously arise without a building issue. I mean, it at least makes the claim harder to prove, because now we're adding in constraints, more things that are necessary minimums for life to function. And you start taking away that kind of complexity, and you're not really sure if it's going to function. I mean, I guess it's possible, but it gets harder and harder the more we learn about cellular biology. You got to admit, right? It gets harder and harder to be like, oh, we can reduce this aspect of the cell and we can reduce this aspect and come down to a very, very simple single-celled organism as part of the abiogenesis, and it'll all come together and work. And well, actually it doesn't. It's kind of like limping along. It's not really life in a way.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I think whatever if there was one first, I mean, there's arguments over whether um, archaeobacteria is like came from a separate abiogenetic event. Seems like probably not, but there's like, I mean, these are things that are open to, to being discussed within the field. But I mean, if there was one common ancestor for all life, it was probably something pretty simple that didn't have a lot of capabilities, and it probably slowly, accumulated those, or maybe quickly accumulated those.
I think it
Um,
would have to be quickly. Cells are pretty volatile, vulnerable.
well, so I think this is maybe a big difference in terms of how we think about this. So I do cancer research, but I'm primarily like a programmer. So I'm on the computational side.
Oh,
So
cool.
I'm thinking
Do you,
about these.
really
Yeah,
quick, if I can
please.
ask, do you do work in like genetic modification as well in those things like CRISPR and whatever? Are you into that kind of stuff?
I almost ended up working at a company that was doing that, but I'm in like a diagnostics currently. I was
Okay,
in drug development. I almost ended up working at a editing company. That stuff is
interesting.
fascinating. I have a friend who's at a
Interesting.
company
Okay,
like that.
carry on. Just
Yeah.
just was curious.
But for me, I think of this as kind of like I don't know. I have almost just like a kind of programmatic way of thinking about this, where you have these reactions that are occurring on the ocean floor, and at some rate, they're generating molecules. This is like in the same way that like if you leave some fruit on your counter, you're gonna get flies. Obviously, that's because there are flies. There have to those things have
Sure,
to exist, right? But
but I get the
if you have
analogy.
these chemicals that are capable of these reactions occurring, and they're just kind of doing it at some rate, they're generating these whatever they are, carbohydrates, RNA molecules, I don't know, membranes, lipids, whatever all these pieces, either all at once there's some rate at which they're generating, or somehow they're causing each other to be generated. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know enough detail about how that would actually work. But when I'm thinking about this generally, I'm thinking about these things are generating these other things. And so it's like for me is like if the first potentially self-replicating molecule or set of molecules or whatever like die off, it's it's not the end of anything. The next one has another chance, they keep doing it, and for maybe a billion years there's just these reactions occurring, and at some point something has accumulated to some degree that a different new regime is occurring, and maybe that whole thing collapses, and it's just like stuff just kind of popping up popping up from the bottom. That's kind of how I conceptualize. That's my very undetailed way of
Yeah, let's
conceptualizing.
okay. Yeah, let's talk about that. Um,
And then at a certain point,
it
you get something
sounds
that's durable enough that has a cell. It's got some reproductive capability, but it's still just, it's still just stuff near it is contributing to it being able to reproduce. And then at some point, like way, way, way down the line, you get something that's like autotrophic, and then you've got something that is motile and it can move to where the sun is. And then we're like, now we're cooking with gas, and this is like a whole new level. Yeah.
yeah, it sounds it's easy to make claims and it's hard to back them
Oh,
up
for sure. I
and
mean, it's
dig into them, and that's the tough thing
trying to
about this.
show how
Like,
this happened or whatever is like,
right. And I mean,
yeah.
here's uh Mr. Westford. Let's go through this. This is another mathematical issue. It's the one just below those two tan pictures. It's that Discord screenshot that I sent you. The one that I said you might have to download it to make it legible, but I think if you open it in your browser, it seems to be pretty legible for me if I do that and then zoom in. We're just going to go through some basic aspects of the cell and
I
the
think I have to download
mutations.
it. That doesn't look very good.
That
Yeah,
looks terrible.
that looks pretty bad.
What are you doing to me, sir? Your disappointment. You're bad and you should feel bad, Mr. Westford. Well, here I'm gonna start reading while he figures it out. It's pretty easy to follow. Imagine there's a primordial soup puddle in which they tell us the first few stages of the evolution of life is about to take place. It is a general assumption that the first life must have been some kind of virus. Doesn't have to be, but so on and so forth. Even the most basic virus is very complex. On a basic level, you need at least the following to form all at the same time, all without the danger of being destroyed by the environment. 1, a protective membrane to house all the contents. 2, a method to metabolize energy. 3, a method of multiplication. 4, RNA or DNA or other some form of genetic information storage. I mean, we did kind of talk about the potential for carbohydrate, but information storage is the point there. 5, the ecosystem to have exactly the right temperature. 6, the ecosystem has to remain stable for as long as needed for the single cell to be able to replicate and further mutate or evolve. For number 7, there you go. Number 7, for many of the above building blocks, hundreds and hundreds of proteins must be available. The building blocks of the building blocks is, that's an interesting one from Dr. Tour. That's like, if you have all the car parts, that's one thing compared to just being given the raw materials of like, copper, rubber, oil. Now mold it and put it all together. It's like that's the other aspect that's tough. And then also the mechanism of combining these things, so on. So here's the mathematical part. Various instance, right temperature. I mean, we're even removing things of like pressure, toxins, agitation, things like that would destroy it. So going down to where the guy's name is DOTH. Now let's assume for the sake of the argument that the probability of each of these events occurring and coinciding is just 1 in 2 random events in nature. That is to say, every time something in nature happens, you get a protein or some other essential condition or building block of the most basic life form. Every time these come together, you randomly get some RNA or DNA. And let's assume that one of those events occurs every single second. Again, this is absurd, as it does not. But let's make these numbers look super, super positive. Now here comes basic statistics. For one of these conditions to occur, one would occur every second. For 2 of these conditions to occur at the same time frame required for evolution or combination, it would take 2 seconds. Mr. Westford, Mr. Westford needs to evolve some seriously better brain cells. He's behind on the totem pole in evolution. For 3 of those conditions to occur at the same time, it would require 4 seconds. For 4 of those conditions to occur at the same time, it would take 8 seconds. Okay, and this is granting 1 condition per second, right? So we're talking about combinations, and the potential of combinations becomes exponential the more potential combinations get included. Yeah. Are you following?
I'm following. I think this is a little bit silly, unfortunately.
You do?
This form of reasoning, right? It's somebody who's making up somebody who thinks that this didn't happen, trying to make up a model that they think sounds very generous. But
no, it's granting the probability of the conditions for it to occur. It's actually the most generous that it could be.
But this is not how mathematically you would want. Like, you would look at the amount of substrate. You would look at.
We're talking about the probability of conditions occurring on a 50-50 chance. That's like super generous.
Is it? Why is that generous?
It's generous because it's when we do these sort of things in labs, it's far less than 50-50 that we get the production of like amino acids from the base materials. We do not get 50% of a homochiral solution. It's like 4 to 20%.
But these numbers are totally arbitrary. There's no calculation of the space of geothermal vents across some size of the Earth that would be capable of generating these types of molecules, right? Like,
you're right.
Those are the kind of calculations that you would want to.
But it's assigning
to have any kind of meaningful.
Couldn't you agree though that saying if we have a 50-50 condition of right temperature or wrong temperature, that's extremely generous?
I don't think so. I don't think. I don't think you would say
because
it's like right or wrong temperature are the two options. It's
because
just
if we're talking on a scale of like 0 to 100 and 72 is the proper temperature for
mhm.
the reaction to occur, you've actually narrowed it down to 1 in 100.
Sure. No,
I
I
mean,
see.
if we're talking about
I
the
see what you're
potential
saying, but it's
across,
just there's things that make it difficult, and there's things that make it occur more often, and like where those line up, that, right? That's the thing. Like, so, let's say it's like, oh, they happen every second, and that's generous. Okay, what if they actually happen a trillion times a second in reality? Right? Like,
I see.
these are
Okay.
totally like arbitrary numbers, and if you multiply a lot of things, you get a big number. And even some of those, like, they don't all have to occur at the same time. You could have something self-replicating, and then it gets encased in a membrane. Like these, uh,
It would still have
a
to
lot of these
happen
assumptions
within
are
a,
just not.
but we're talking about, again, we're talking about the constraints. So like even if you do produce something like an RNA that's not in a membrane and
Mm-hmm,
then the membrane comes along later,
mm-hmm.
you still have a time frame, a limited time frame
Well,
window.
let's say you have RNA constantly being generated. Now it's not about this one
We
particle interacting with this other particle. It's a process intersecting another process, and that might
that's a
that might be almost
massive
inevitable.
assumption.
Well,
That's a
it's not an assumption. These are just these right. Like every explanation could be wrong except for the one that's right.
that's
Right?
more in the realm of like possibility rather than
Yeah.
probability. And like even then like 1 in 55 quadrillion trillion chance. So you're saying there's a chance.
No,
It's
no.
like
I'm saying that those assumptions are probably not true, and the numbers are made up. Right? It's like whose line? The
okay, so you're
everything's made up,
saying
and the
we're
points
on
don't matter.
so you're saying we're on equal footing then if we're saying that this sort of probability thing of granting one mutation or one
Well, I'm saying
event
that
per
this model
second
is
the same
is
as
50% chance
aminos.
of this model being correct. It's either right or it's wrong, so it's 50-50.
Well, I mean, aminos, we the pathway for any of the building blocks of life to be constantly coming forth from some kind of reaction, it if such a reaction could occur to where it could be constantly coming forth from, we are so far away from being able to con, even being able to reasonably conceive of like an A to Z
hmm
methodology of that occurring.
Yeah.
Like we're
No,
so
I,
far.
I wouldn't I wouldn't make a positive claim that like I think this like or I know this occurred or like this definitely occurred or anything like that. I'm just so maybe
That's
this
what I
will
mean. That's
maybe
what I
this will
mean about
help.
the possibilities of
So
things. Is like if you're sorry to interrupt, but
yeah.
like if we're talking, I really want to make a distinction here between a possibility of a
hmm
thing versus a probability
hmm
of a thing, right? I mean, yeah,
well the
sure, it's
probability
possible.
I would
It's
say is unknown, right?
yeah, well, sorry, I don't necessarily mean like statistical probability. I mean to where we at least have some kind of conception of it actually coming into
So
reality.
like what you're talking about is like a plausible explanation. Here's the thing that we
Yeah,
can lay out, and it's like these things check out, and this adds up, and
yeah.
maybe it didn't happen exactly like this. Maybe something else happened, but this is at least a plausible
It's at
like
least close. Yeah,
plan
it's
of
got it's
like
a
here's how it could
direction.
have happened.
Right, right.
Maybe
Not
maybe
just
it didn't.
like
Maybe it happened a different way. Right? It could literally be possible. It could be likely for life to occur in this way, and it could be the case that actually God created the first organism. Like
yeah. I
right?
mean like
Like it
if we're
it
talking
literally wouldn't
possibility,
prove.
if we're
Yeah.
talking possibility, isn't it possible that there could be a geyser at the bottom of the ocean spitting out narwhals constantly? I mean,
I mean, it's not really possible in like the same kind of way.
but
um
if you really want to stretch, there's a possibility.
mhm. I
I
mean,
mean,
I think
you know what I'm
my
saying?
yeah. So going back to so like, So when I'm thinking about this, my thought process isn't like, oh hey, I've thought of a way that like theoretically, hypothetically, maybe this could occur, and therefore like I know that that's the case. Like now it's solved. I'm trying to think through. It's like, well, what thing, like let's say that this did occur, how might it have occurred, and then you try to look for that, and see if you can find that, right? I wouldn't
Hmm.
try to imagine, well, how could this not have happened, and right, because you won't make any headway with that. That's the only reason. The the idea that I can come up with a possible way that this could have occurred, I don't think that that means that it's like therefore true. It's just
Right.
that's where I'm going to start with, like looking at, trying to find some evidence like for or against that or whatever, right?
Right. Yeah, you get a direction, and then you explore it, and you start
If I'm
to
looking for somebody
create the
lost at sea, I'm
constraints.
like, well, I don't know, where could the wind have carried them, and I'm gonna start looking there. Like,
Right.
I'm not gonna look like, well, I don't know, maybe they just flew up into the air.
Sure.
So
And
yeah.
it's fine. It's scientific to have a proposition and run after it, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Um, where it where I don't like that, I think we have crossed over in some of these cases beyond the boundaries of science is when we do have things that directly disprove it, right? Like, I mean, it, I'm sure that you're familiar with like the sayings like, well, you can have a million proofs of a thing, but one replicable disproof
Mm-hmm.
is worth its weight in gold,
For sure.
and that happens more than I think a lot of evolutionary biologists would like to admit that are working either in, I mean, maybe not necessarily disproofs in the origin of life of what I've seen, but rather they just kind of extrapolate out how far they've gone. They're like, "Oh, we built a self-replicating RNA,"
Mm-hmm.
when in reality they actually just built a chemical sort of combination that ended up making these platelets essentially that just formed and then stacked upon each other. And when they were broken, they broke apart and then they continued stacking in two separate stacks like that. And it's like that's a long ways away from self-replicating RNA. That's not.
Maybe overestimating how much of the puzzle that they've solved.
Yeah,
I mean, what you're
yeah.
talking about with I don't know if you heard about this. This was like, oh gosh, maybe it was like 5 years ago at this point. But there was, I think it was some satellites. There was some kind of like physics experiment, something, and there's some satellites, and the timing was such that the communication between them or some event that they were observing would have happened faster than the speed of light. And
Hmm.
you know, nobody freaked out. They were like, okay, it's probably a technical error, but at the same time, everybody was a little bit excited. Like, I don't know, maybe something weird is going on. And they were like, okay, this one wasn't accounting for relativity properly, like general relativity and its clock timing, whatever. Like, okay, we solved why we were getting that signal. But it's like, as long as something impossible is happening, like we're gonna keep looking at it, right? That's the and as long as if there's things that come up in terms of that would be impossible in terms of our understanding of how evolution has historically occurred on Earth, or how it functions mechanistically, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that's like a direct contradiction of things in the model is like, okay, well, got to understand, is this some bad data, is this technically wrong, or is this really like we genuinely have to like revise some significant things here, and those
Definitely.
revisions do occur, and they should occur. um
Can I ask you a question that Dr. John Lennox likes to ask people?
oh, I
He's a,
remember that name.
yeah, Oxford mathematician. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
Lennox with two N's. Yeah,
I remember this guy. Yeah.
he says, would you trust a computer that was randomly composed?
Oh, yeah. This is a classic. Um,
Hmm.
I mean, it would depend on, first of all, if I had another choice. That would be that would be probably a big, um, I would trust it as far as I can throw it.
And isn't that interesting? And that gets into, are you familiar with uh, Alvin Plantinga? He's a philosopher.
Yeah. I think. I mean, it's basically like the idea. It's like, well, how can we trust ourselves as a
The mind.
biological system that has evolved randomly, and
Right. And even there's
uh-huh.
nothing about our brain that aims for truth. It only aims for
Mm-hmm.
survivability and reproduction, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we're going to test, if we're going to
But
use our brain
I
to
think
test
those are
backwards, we can't
yeah.
trust our own testing even.
So I think some of these things have some validity, but like you're saying with the like experiments around early life, they're really massively overstated. So it's like, okay, how can we really trust like a biological computer that was like randomly assembled? It's like, well, it wasn't just randomly assembled. Let's say we're within the paradigm of theory of evolution. How would this describe it? It's not randomly assembled. It's random, and then the computers that didn't survive and find a partner to settle down and start a family with, they all died. And it's like, okay, do we trust the ones that are really good at existing in the physical world?
What's trust
Okay,
in
well
this
maybe
system?
maybe we trust it a little bit more. And it's like,
There's so
okay,
many.
it's not giving us truth. That's true. There's optical illusions. If you put your hand here, you can get the hot dog. I don't know, whatever, right? There's there's
There's
lots of
so many.
um,
This is what I'm
the
saying though.
blind
There's so
spot at the
many
back of our
things.
retina, right? But at the same
There's
time, it's like it's not. Well, our our brains, okay, they aren't going for like I guess ultimate truth or whatever. They're going for survival but okay, I mean, it takes a little bit to survive in the world. If your brain wasn't telling you that there's a tiger and there's a tiger, then you don't exist anymore because you've just been eaten by the tiger. It has, and if your brain can't tell you how to use your body to run, then you're also dead. If it can't tell you, you know, your brain is communicating with also like your gut and it's telling you like how to do different things across your body that are like unconscious different things. If it couldn't do those things, then you'd be dead. So it's like, do I
and
trust a
it's just
computer that is keeping a
interesting.
system alive without me even knowing about it? Do I trust a computer that allows me to like run around and locomote? Do I trust a computer that allows me to meaningfully communicate with other people? And if I was deluded and thought I was just talking to other people, we wouldn't be able to hunt together, and the mammoth would stomp on all of us and gore us with its tusks or whatever, right? So it's like there's a lot of constraints on this. In the same way you
A
were talking
lot.
about constraints, like the constraints on the level of truth, it actually needs a pretty high level of truth to be able to do the things that it does. Or maybe I'm like, a brain in a
Not
vat or a demon
necessarily.
is, right? But
Well, not necessarily. If you're just saying it like that, it doesn't. Because see, so for the audience that is not familiar with Plantinga's argument, he says beliefs do not necessarily need to be true or false for us to survive and reproduce. If we see a tiger and we think, oh, that tiger's going to eat me, I better run away. Or if I think that when I see a tiger, a lightning bolt is going to shoot out of the sky and kill me, so I better run away.
mhm.
Either way, that belief leads to survivability and
but
it gets passed on.
but wait, because if you believe things that are more, if your brain is capable of believing things that are more rational and more consistent and Occam's razor better explanations, it
I
requires
don't
less
accept Occam's
computing
razor.
power. No, I'm saying Occam's razor. I'm saying
I don't accept it. I don't think that's a good argument, because I mean, if we talk about Occam's razor in anything biological, then that's just granting. I
no, no, no,
mean,
no, no, no. This is not like an empirical claim or whatever. This is just if you have a better model, it requires less computation to apply your model. This is just from like a programming perspective or whatever. You don't need as much data if your model is closer to like reality, right?
hmm.
So if you think a lightning bolt is going to hit you, that's something that you need like kind of a special computation versus if you think the tiger is going to eat you, that can be consistent with, oh, maybe a bear is going to eat me, maybe a wolf is going to eat me. It's a much simpler model, and therefore it requires less computing power, and therefore you have more brain for other things. So it's literally advantageous to be able to model the world more effectively.
I mean, that doesn't necessarily follow, because
Why
if
does that not
if
follow?
that were true, then we wouldn't see from the evolutionary perspective, we would not see the rise of religions. When in
That
reality,
assumes that religions aren't good models.
the modeling of religion is very good for reality. That religion produces the highest amount of reproduction and survivability among populations. Non-religious
Hey, it
societies
got people washing their
suffer
hands.
in both aspects. What's that?
It got people washing their hands. I'm Jewish, and so
Well,
right, that's like a big part of
I mean, in all sorts of things,
yeah.
like the belief, the a central belief of that we all have to work together and not hurt each other,
Yeah, that's
so
huge.
that
Yeah.
I mean, I have every belief, sharing with the community.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So
it,
so
but
religions
it's
are a great
from
model.
an yes, but from this is like Plantinga's argument, is that from a naturalistic evolutionary perspective, religion, the belief in the supernatural, is not demonstratable. It would be a false belief. We can only represent what is there. And so it, just like the
I mean, it's
lightning
not all
bolt being
false.
extra data, the model is of believing in a God existing as a community would be extra data relative to what your senses are pointing to. So what you just argued doesn't actually
No.
apply, even from an
No,
evolutionary
no,
internal
I'm
critique.
not. No. I'm not saying extra. So it's
More computational power.
no. It might be less computational power. So seeing the world as totally chaotic versus a world in which, like you were saying, we work together. There's some kind of order that has to be okay. Look, if we believed in a God who flips over every table every time you're not looking, or you know what I mean, like there's certain yeah, there's certain constraints on religion in terms of what you could believe that it could be functional. If the religion that you developed caused you to, okay, so I mean, there's you've heard of there's Shakers, right?
Shakers. Context. What do you mean? What's the
Let me make
context of the
sure.
Shakers here?
Yeah, so Shakers, I'm trying to remember, are they related to Quakers? But it's basically, it was a particular Christian particular Christian sect that was like no marriage, no reproducing.
Hyper
We're just
Puritans.
we're just not doing that at all, and it's not very popular anymore because part of that religion is like an inability to reproduce itself other than ideologically. But it's great if you can also, like, your followers can reproduce. That helps have more people. So there's constraints on religion for sure. But if your religion is like, be plentiful and multiply, then you'll probably get more followers of that religion. Partly because people love to be fruitful and multiply, but partly because you create more people. So I mean, I think it's not so trivial as, like, if you believe in something that isn't exactly there, that it's more computation. It can actually reduce computation.
Isn't that interesting how our universe works that way? From none of it even
which says
from
something
a
about
completely
human imagination
naturalistic.
and how important human imagination
Where does that
is.
even come from, dude?
Yeah.
This from naturalistic evolution, it doesn't even make sense. Like none of it lines up. It doesn't make, like, I mean, we see it and we can just be like, yeah, well, we must have evolved it because we're doing it.
Yeah.
And like it's just
No, you're
some
right.
kind of
It's
emergent
totally
property.
weird. Yeah.
But it totally would not
It's wild.
be predictable. Like that's something that would be like the
if you
opposite
ran the Earth,
of
you might not expect to see humans. Maybe, like, I don't know. I mean, if you were human, like, you would have to be something sentient enough to be able to observe in that way. But it's like for, the first several billion years, whatever, they weren't looking around like, oh, this is, how could this have happened? They were just saying like, leaf, or, right?
I mean, it would have to be something simple, yeah.
Mhm. But
Because the
I think
way
there's,
that
have you heard of the anthropic principle?
andropic?
Anthropic.
Oh,
Like,
anthropic?
anthro, like human
Yeah,
principle
human
something.
anthropology.
Yeah.
No.
So it's basically the idea
Check one out
that
on
there are certain things that are weird or might seem unlikely that are actually, if you think about it a little bit more, are actually necessary.
Hmm.
So so something like so this is an
It's in,
argument that I've heard from,
coming from cosmology here, huh?
yeah, but it applies kind of broadly too. But it's something like I've heard this challenge from like a, I don't know, creationist or something, whatever people I've talked to. It's like, well, isn't it like, aren't we so lucky to live on a planet that's a habitable distance from the sun? And it's like, the anthropic principle says, or actually, the anthropic principle is deeper. It's like, aren't we lucky to live in a universe that can support life? And it's like, well, by definition, we wouldn't, right? There's no eye to look at another possible universe and say, it sucks that there's no life. There just is no life to observe that. And the same with like,
Right.
isn't it lucky that we live in a habitable zone? We don't live on Pluto. It's like, well, we wouldn't live on Pluto. We couldn't live on Pluto. And so that's something that
Because
might
we're
seem like it's incredible that this happened, but it's also like, well, there's no alternative. There's no way for us to observe. Ah, oh, sucks, dude. We're on Mars. Like, man, this blows. Ah,
right.
right.
It would the alternative equivalent would essentially be like, man, it sucks that we're here on Earth instead of over in the Andromeda system where everything's so much better.
Yeah, it's a
Where
party in
we just can't.
It sucks,
And
right? It has to be within a range that is possible for existence.
you almost sound like
Otherwise,
you're almost getting into like the fine tuning argument. Are you familiar with that one when you've talked with
yeah.
Christians? Yeah,
Hmm. But
it's an
it
interesting.
applies in lots of places, and it's like, wow, isn't it like insane that there's a species on Earth that is able to look around and be like, wait, what the fuck? Right? Like, and it is insane, but at the same time, it's also necessary because there is no alternative. There's no animal that's looking around and saying, dude, it's too bad that nobody can appreciate the grandeur of the universe. It just logically isn't possible
Bro,
for
it
the
sucks the night sky is so cloudy. I really wish I could see those stars. I wish that we were positioned in a place in our galaxy that we could see the stars better, bro.
Yeah. Like
Just love
that's
stargazing.
possible, but like for ants to say like it sucks that there's no humans, it's not logically possible. And it's like
Right.
when you look at it
Sure.
from the perspective of, it's like, well, somebody had to do it first. Somebody had to have the kind of complicated consciousness, neuroses, questioning of our place in the world, ability
Hold
to do
on
this.
here.
Somebody had to do it first.
Hold on here. Wikipedia says the anthropic principle is often criticized for lacking
Right.
falsifiability. I knew it. There's another one. You're getting me with all these non-falsifiable things. Evolution, anthropic principle. You have more faith than I do as a Christian,
Is
sir.
there that must be a specific, because it's a general principle, but it might be like applied in specific.
It's just talking about the people that criticize it.
Interesting. I mean,
They,
so there's like, so there's
I mean,
things that it
they
can
say
do and
it's
things that it can't do.
they say right. They say it's non-scientific, but what it sounds like to me is you're
It's
making a philosophical and
more than
logical argument.
scientific. Yeah. So like,
Yeah.
so things that it can't do. So it can't solve. So it might be possible. Like it might be logically possible for there to be like the only universe that exists. It's maybe complicated to even try to define any of that, but maybe there's like one universe that exists and it can't support life. And if that's possible, maybe that could have been the universe and there's no people. And so the fact that we're here, like it's necessary for us to be here, for us to question whether it's possible, or necessary for us to be here. But it might be possible for there to be nothing. And if there's only one universe that exists, whatever that might mean, there might be no people in. And the anthropic principle doesn't solve that issue.
Right.
For that to work, you would need. So okay, the coolest.
It's just talking about perspective, essentially.
It's perspective. The coolest, like totally speculative, like scientific pondering that I think is really cool about, like, fine tuning or whatever, is the idea that there might be. So there's some speculation around how the formation of a black hole might create like a universe or something. I don't know if I'm out of date with even talking about this.
Once you cross the singularity of a black hole, you enter a whole other universe.
And if it's the case that some kind of like almost evolutionary thing, so it's like when you look at this is more of a joke than like a philosophical or scientific thing, but it's like when you look at the universe, it's like it's not great for life, but it's great at making black holes. And it's like, what if you have universes and they if they have a black hole, it spawns like a new universe, and that universe might, like, the universes that are good at spawning black holes will spawn more universes, and they'll spawn universes like them, but a little bit distinct.
It's like constantly reproducing black holes with other universes.
And it's like the ones with lots of black holes make lots of universes, so like they're
the things
that
people get paid to speculate on. I swear, dude.
I just think
that's what astrophysicists are getting paid to. You taking our money? Look at black holes all day.
But if there's lots of universes and they can vary, and they vary like that, then the odds of there being some universe with some kind of life, I guess, goes up to really high. But that's totally speculative. We don't know if there's like, if multiverse, whatever, anything is possible, or that's a speculative thing. That's not a.
And that, to me, that just seems
but I do think
speculative.
I think it's very neat.
Sure. Yeah, I mean,
from a universe, a metaphysics fanfic perspective, it's way at the top of my list. I like it a lot.
And plus, you like astrophysics and whatnot. So, yeah. So, yeah, we're at the 3 hours.
Yeah, we're past the 3 hour.
Let's wrap it up. I mean, I know we didn't get into a whole lot of.
We didn't solve
particulars. We did not solve evolution. We're both still stuck in our ways stubbornly, but
I thought we would get a consensus. Gotta give it. Please do just one more hour, dude. We're gonna get the consensus. Dude, please.
I mean, it's the same thing that I said from the outset.
Atheist creationist debates end 10 minutes before they reach consensus. Just gambler fallacy, everything.
Yeah, gambler fallacy. I mean, it's the same thing that I said from the outset. I mean, everything that I'm hearing, it's assuming the consequent. Like, you have the patterns, and then you assume that it's caused by evolution. But that's the thing in question.
I would say that it's almost like that, except the consequent was built to match the data, and so it is cheating, but it's cheating in the way of like, it's like a smart cheat. You look at the data and you come up with like an explanation that fits the data.
Well, it would be like this. Like, it'd be like premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, premise question, conclusion.
Oh.
In a way. Profit, yeah. Question mark profit.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
I think it's like, I would put it like this. If evolution didn't match what we observed, then we would tear it down and guillotine its head off and build a new one. Right? And that's what's happened through the history of, pre-Darwin, different, like Lamarckianism, and all these different ideas about how these things might be connected. You had Linnaeus.
We didn't do that with Newtonian physics, though, until Einstein came along. We knew that there were problems with the way that we looked at astronomy and large scale
Mm-hmm.
cosmological formulas, and we didn't do that with Newton. We wrote in exceptions after exception until it
Mm-hmm.
was rebuilt from the ground up, right? And
Mm-hmm.
again, John Lennox likes
Maybe
to bring
we're
up.
yeah.
He says Darwin and Einstein are approximately the same age in terms of their theories. You know, Darwin's a little older, but John Lennox says as time has gone on, it's become easier and easier to come up with proofs for Einstein's theory of relativity. I think he's talking about general
Yeah,
relativity,
I mean
not
that's
special.
again where astrophysics is. It sounds weird to say, but in a sense, it's simpler than biology because you really have like you have not so many like players in question. You know what I
Right,
mean?
a lot of
You
moving
got like okay,
parts.
a lot of photons, a lot of helium, a lot of hydrogen, but it's like
But
you
but
know.
when it comes to Darwin's Origin of Species, it's become harder. It's definitely has become harder. You have to admit with the rise of, I mean, we're talking about morphology, and then um, Darwin's like, oh well, you know, we're gonna end up just we've just barely started digging, so we're gonna find more fossils over time, and he thought that a cell was just a brick.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he thought an animal cell could be transported between a plant and an animal because it's just a circle with nothing in it, but
Mm-hmm.
they're universes of their own, and we
Yeah,
know that the cells between plants and animals are
it's crazy complex.
drastically different and
Mm-hmm.
drastically complicated, and they become more complicated. And I mean, I think DNA should have been the nail in the coffin. I find it interesting to hear evolutionists say, "Oh yeah, DNA is exactly what we would predict with evolution and like everything that we
No, I
find."
mean
But
there's been
you
tons
know,
of
there's
surprises.
yeah.
Yeah,
I I mean, I would hope that
but I
people
mean,
would admit that,
is
and
it?
then
Does it? I don't know. Does it give you pause to see that I guess two things. Does it give you pause to see that um, with the advent of understanding of DNA and now sequencing that the field is like taking on those things and like advancing as a result? And does it give you pause to see that okay, we had just like morphology and it led us to this kind of like tree of life understanding where things seemed like they were similar or different to each other in like a kind of way that you could put it into this structure. And then we have like DNA where we get to like you kind of get to like peel it over and see the answer. It's like okay, but what is it really? And it's like yeah, I mean there's surprises, there's individual surprises, but overall it was like yeah, the phylogeny is a thing. does does that does that give you pause in
it
terms
would
of
it
thinking
would
that this
concern me
should be
a
some
little
kind of
more.
like
Yeah,
what
it
would this
would
be a nail in the coffin of?
well, it I would be a little bit more concerned if it was a little bit more like electromagnetism, to where there's a very clear and defined science and aspect of it. Everything is very detailed. There's really no controversy within the field when it comes to origin of life and origin of species. If I mean, so let's take the DNA tree of life examples that we apply now. There's not one normative tree of life that is proposed or agreed upon. There's at least like four or five different trees of life when
There's different ways to build it.
coming
Yeah.
from DNA, and they're all very contested, even by all like
Mm-hmm.
uh, biological evolutionists, evolutionary
Sure, but
biologists.
there's
Direction.
as far as I'm aware, there's no
It's like
evolutionary biologist out there that says no organisms have common ancestors with each other.
no organisms have. Well, that's interesting because that kind of starts from a see, you're starting with the presupposition that's like, oh well, if we share 95 to 90% of 7% of our genome with chimps, then we have a common ancestor because it's so
No, that's
close.
that's
That's a
not the
presupposition.
no that's not the explanation. No.
In terms of the sequencing, that's not how they're looking at. I mean, I
No,
know that's
it's
a
like
super simplified way of saying it, but I mean,
it's a little
they
it's
are
a little too
sequencing the DNA.
simplified to
They
make
are
the argument.
sequencing the DNA for similarities, right?
It's the patterns of similarities
Between
and differences, right? So it's the kind of things that you expect to see conserved, the kind of things that you expect to see different. So here's an example. So you might expect that maybe animals are more or less closely related to each other simply by like their size, just how big they are, or something like that, right? Like I I think there's kind of evolution is maybe a victim of its own success, because I think you have to think pretty hard about what like a
I disagree. I'm a victim here, being
you're the
totally
victim.
traumatized
If
by
you've been
evolution.
injured by evolution,
Call here.
yeah. Um,
Doing a class action lawsuit right now.
Yeah. I will.
I never got wings. That's what
Wait,
I'm mad
class
about.
action? I didn't realize this was some kind of communist channel. What are we talking about?
Yeah, I think that there's probably lizard people out there who evolved a little bit fast, just a little bit faster than us, and we're all underneath them. And we're trying to expose that here. We're really trying to try to eke out a little bit more than we're getting right now. That's all I want.
Well,
How are you
here,
guys doing?
should
That was a 3 hour.
I feel like
Is
we
there
should
any-
get into because we're just gonna keep bringing up interesting things, and it's
Yeah,
we,
that
we
I was
are
like
going to
There's no reason
continue
for
to
this
find
to
other
ever
things
end
to
if we
argue
don't.
about.
at 2 hours
I
and
think we
50
got
minutes.
our
I was
high
like, well,
points.
that's a whole can of worm. That's another can of worms. It's never gonna stop.
We got our high points, I think.
Mm-hmm.
This can always happen another day, but I do need to get like making dinner.
Yeah.
So.
Same.
No, this is
All right, if
great.
there's any-
I super appreciate.
What
Really,
did the
really
chat think?
respectful.
How many did we
really-
have in here?
We had at one point like 40, and it's kind of ebbed down a bit now. I mean, a lot of people throughout were wishing that it was more combative and less friendly. A
Oh,
lot of people
well,
are like, "I want
sorry.
blood."
Well, I know. It's kind of hard to have blood when the way that I approach evolution debates. I'm like, yeah, I'll grant that, whatever. But you're
Yeah,
still wrong.
let's look at the evidences that there was a very evidential debate.
I'm not hearing a lot of ad hominems.
Right, yeah.
very sophisticated way of debating that is just not proper
That's
Yeah,
a
so,
fallacy. That's a fallacy.
If you look right here at this graph, squirrels have 2.5 times the ratio of their brain to their body, and humans have this.
and then
you
there's
bitch.
you.
Yeah. You just had to have a lot of "you bitch" at the end of the things you guys were saying. Then people would have been clapping.
If you scroll down to figure 3, you bitch.
Yeah. Well, thanks you guys for popping
blind.
on.
Read figure 3.
I did star some things. Wait, people are asking, hey, where's your lab coat if you're a scientist, man?
Oh shit! No, they don't let me in the lab. I'm totally computationalist.
Okay, and then there was people thinking that your door behind you is cracked open, but my hypothesis is that it's something hanging on it, right? It's got to be.
And kind of.
Mm-hmm.
People are like, how is it cracked open slightly at an angle?
So I actually don't open that door because that's a portal to hell. So I climb out my
that's what they
window,
were-
and that's how I get to the rest of the house.
It's the red. The red from hell is seeping
It's
through
seeping
there.
in, actually.
It's seeping in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I said like I can't go over like 3.5 hours is my heart out, because that's as long as I can keep that shut.
Yeah, you
You
have to go
run away.
Mm-hmm.
You have to go beat back the demons a little more.
Understandable. I got a phone number for a Catholic exorcist, an Orthodox exorcist, and do rabbis do exorcisms too?
Modest Yahoo did in that one movie, the Dybbuk. It was pretty good.
Okay, well just get everyone together and just
Right.
The power of Christ compels you. The power
Make
of
sure they don't
Moses compels you.
Make sure they don't cross the memes, whatever they do.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, you guys, any
you
last
gonna call?
last thoughts? Keep
No,
it
this
under a
was-
minute each.
This was fun, man.
Yeah, this is.
I mean, I don't get to
Everything
talk
my
science
debate
with
opponent
people too
said was a
often.
total lie.
It was a total lie. He has no idea what he's talking about.
All the scientists,
No
all
one-
the best scientists, the greatest scientists.
No one can look at this evidence more than me. No one.
I looked at it like I
I'm
was looking
I'm
at the
the
sun. I
best.
just stared at it.
I'm the best anti-evolution debater. I was completely created this way.
Yeah, I would almost say I evolved to be like this, but maybe I did. Anyways, I'm gonna
These
end this. You
debates are
guys,
not evolving; they're actually just adapting. I just want to make that clear.
yes. This was only a micro debate. This wasn't never got to
Wasn't a
the macro
macro.
debate.
Macro.
That's
Yeah, it
true.
wasn't a macro debate.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm
Right on.
get out of here, you guys. You guys have a good one.
Well, take care. Thank you so much. This was fun.
All right, stream's over.